Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is part 5 of What If Godlike Naruto was in Sekirei. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Fire. That was the first thing Naruto saw as he walked through the deserted streets of the place that had once been his home. Konohagakure no Saito, the village hidden in the leaves. What had once been a beautiful city with buildings of various shapes, sizes and makes, was now nothing more than a burning pile of rubble. The many buildings Naruto had come to know during his tenure within its walls were gutted out, flames rising high above his head and smoke billowing into the air. The old marketplace that had once been so lively and filled with people doing their daily shopping, gossiping about this and that, where children had once played in the street, running to and fro as they laughed in joy, was now nothing more than a couple of burnt-down buildings. The Hokage mansion, the large red tower where the leader of the village resided, was now nothing more than toppled remains, red-hot flames consuming it and turning what little was left into dust and ash. Even the Hokage monument, the monument with the 5 faces of the leaders past and a symbol of the village's will of fire, had been lit up in a blaze of acrid flames that looked hot enough to melt steel. Yet despite the heat of the flames, Naruto could not feel them. Despite the fact that his enhanced senses should be gagging on the stench of smoke, Naruto could smell nothing. And despite the fact that he should be choking as ash filled his lungs, every time Naruto took a breath he tasted nothing but fresh, clean air. Ah, so this wasn't real, he realized. It was a dream. A rather vivid one at that. Naruto didn't normally have such realistic dreams. Most of his nightmares were often fuzzy, unfocused and unclear, merely vague images that denoted to his failures and inadequacies. This dreams, nightmare, vision, whatever it was nothing like the normal horrors he faced when sleeping. As Naruto continued his walk through the abandoned village, he came to realize that he was not quite as alone as he thought. There, standing just a few meters from him, was a vaguely familiar figure. A man. He was on fire. Naruto belatedly realized. His light gray hair shifted and billowed as it was caught within the thermal updraft caused by his own flames. Similarly, the long black cloak he wore was being disturbed by the wind, moving in time with the frantic pace of the fire. Covering the bottom half of his face was a mask. It moved, and with that movement Naruto realized the man was talking. Why? He asked, a combination of anger, confusion, and disgust. Out of all the possible ashikabi I could get, why does mine have to be a man? Naruto's return to the land of the living was just as slow as it always was, not even a dream as vivid as that could make him wake up any faster. There was no shooting up out of bed covered in sweat, no frantic muscle spasms that came with his nightmare. He had lived for a long time, and in that time Naruto had experienced many nightmares, one for almost every day he had been alive. The only times Naruto had not experienced a nightmare were those days he seduced a woman to sleep with, which had been the whole point of the seducing in the first place. As he groggily came back to the land of the living, Naruto thought about that last dream he had. It had been very familiar to another dream he'd had 2 days ago. The dream that had led him to his rescue of Kusano, and the girl's subsequent winning to him. Did that mean this other person was reacting to him as well? God, he hoped not. Aside from the fact that Naruto wasn't into guys, he didn't really care to have any more Sekirei. It was hard enough dealing with the 3 he had currently. It was still dark outside. As Naruto looked towards the window he saw that the sun hadn't even risen yet. The blonde closed his eyes and gave a tired sigh as he realized that dream had woken him up even earlier than usual. Feeling a headache beginning to form, he made to rub the bridge of his nose with his left hand, only to find he couldn't. In fact, Naruto couldn't even lift his arms, either of them. Blinking, the blonde frowned before he realized the most likely reason he couldn't move. Sure enough, there were his 2 reasons, sleeping as they cuddled into his side. Musubi was in her usual spot on his right, her body closer to his than usual, possibly a byproduct made by her subconscious due to their altercation 3 days ago. Unlike the last few times they had slept together, this time she was wearing clothing, a set of red bloomers and a white gym shirt, the clothes she usually used when training or sparring with Mia. The reason for her wearing clothes now had nothing to do with him and everything to do with Mia. Normally, Naruto would be the first person to wake up, and he would often be the one to make breakfast. Monday that had not been the case, he had been too tired from being hit so unexpectedly with Musubi's pain through the bond and the events that followed that he simply hadn't been able to get up. Mia had walked in on them in order to wake them up. Needless to say she had become quite cross with the three of them when she saw that the excitable fist fighter was sleeping in nothing, not even her skivvies. Like always she was drooling on his chest as she held his arm in a vice grip between the cleavage of her very expansive bust. On his other side was Akatsu, wearing a black Metallica shirt he had bought some decades ago when the band had first come out. Like always she barely seemed to fit in it, the fabric tightening to such proportions that Naruto was surprised it hadn't ripped yet. Another thing Naruto noticed when Akatsu's bare leg curled tighter around him was that she wasn't wearing panties, which was actually surprising to Naruto. Much like Musubi had been forced into wearing clothes, when Mia had realized that Akatsu wasn't wearing any panties when they slept together she had forbidden the Snow Woman from not wearing any panties. Naruto knew for a fact that she had been wearing panties when they had gone to bed, meaning sometime during the night they had been removed. He wondered if she had done so consciously or unconsciously during the night. The blonde closed his eyes and released a tired sigh as he let his head hit the bottom of the bed. It was strange how quickly things change. Back before he had met Musubi every day went by so quickly, 100 years could pass him by in the blink of an eye. And why shouldn't it? It wasn't like 100 years actually meant something to Naruto, he had seen dozens of those. Sure, things might change during that time, but at the same time, very little actually changed. At least as far humanity went, new and innovative technologies couldn't change how ugly they were. The many laws passed that gave equal rights and freedoms didn't dismiss how people would still find a way to discriminate against each other. Wars were still fought, and lives were still lost. In truth, humanity had never changed. Now though, a single day seemed to last a lifetime. Each day seemed to bring with it a new experience, the fact that this entire situation was a new experience notwithstanding. He would have never imagined that some of the things he had witnessed in just a few days had been possible. Bonded. He had bonded himself to not just one, but 3 girls. 3 girls who were so different from each other in almost every way that mattered. All of them were so unique that Naruto couldn't even begin to truly describe them, and each day seemed to show him something new. Yet even then, with all of the amazing things that he had experienced, life was not without difficult. In fact, one might say that there were even more difficulties now that he had bonded to those 3 Sekirei. Several problems in particular seemed to have been brought to the fore. Mortality, and all of the differences that it brought with it. Each and every problem Naruto had been brought forth was caused by his immortality. Not all of the problems he had were as simple as the fact that he would live forever and his Sekirei would die either. Compared to some of the other issues that was the easiest problem to deal with. The bond and all of the problems it brought, and the inability to connect to his Sekirei were by far the largest he had to deal with. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say his struggles at keeping his distance from those he had bonded to was the largest issue. The struggle between what he wanted to do and what he knew he had to do. It was difficult. Naruto knew that he should keep as much distance between them as possible. That way when they died he wouldn't hurt as much as he was already going to now that they had bonded, and yet. Naruto didn't want that, he didn't want to keep his distance. More than anything else in this world, Naruto wanted someone he could connect with, people he could cherish. It was hard, living forever. In order to cope with the loneliness that came from immortality, he had kept his distance from the world, grown cold, apathetic. It was the only way for him to survive with his sanity intact. Now that he had bonded to his Sekirei, he could no longer claim apathy. With the emotions of his Sekirei a constant thrum in the back of his mind, more and more of his own burgeoning emotions were reawakening. He had experienced joy, happiness, pain, sadness, fear, anger, and many other emotions within such a short time, emotions the blonde had thought he had long disassociated himself from. They had been locked away within the deepest reaches of his mind where they could no longer hurt him. Or so he thought. In many ways this was a problem. He had spent so long going without truly feeling anything that he no longer knew how to deal with his own emotions. More and more Naruto found himself making mistakes, the first issue being when he had gone out of his way to rescue Musubi from those lightning twins, the second being deciding to help Akatsu, the third and many others that had followed being the near-botched rescuing of Kusano. While Naruto couldn't say he regretted doing any of these, it had also brought him the current problems he was trying to deal with. And just as problematic was this new issue Naruto had faced with Musubi. Though the girl seemed to have forgiven him completely for his words the other day, the blonde had found himself racked with guilt. Even looking at the brunette made him almost flinch. It was frustrating. He shouldn't feel guilty, a part of him said. It wasn't like he hadn't spoken the truth. If anything, she should be grateful he had given her such a wake-up call before she suffered the same heart-shattering pain he had. Yet that part of him that was so keen on telling him this, the constant voice in the back of his head that had kept him sane all this time, had been getting smaller and smaller. Now it was almost a whisper, and as that whisper disappeared, Naruto's guilt increased. A shift of movement startled the blonde. Looking down at the source, Naruto saw Musubi nuzzle against his chest, a comical sight considering she was also nuzzling against her own drool. The blonde began to chuckle mildly before seeming to realize he was doing it. Gritting his teeth, he took several deep breaths and tried to center himself. It might have worked too, but as the blonde felt his own emotions begin to settle down, a new one entered the picture. Panic. And it did not belong to him. Naruto only had enough time to identify the source of that emotion as Kusano, before the door to his room opened and the girl in question ran in without closing the door behind her. Ku. Naruto said, blinking as the little girl ran over to the foot of his bed, lifted up the covers and clambered underneath. Her form was visible only as a large lump as she wiggled and squirmed her way forward, climbing on top of him, Musubi, and Akatsu as she made her way to the front of the bed. Naruto sat up, taking the two girls clinging to him with him as he did so just as Kusano's head poked out from underneath the covers and she began clinging to him, her entire body shaking in fear. Ku-chan, what's wrong? Are you okay? You're not hurt, are you? Naruto asked in a rapid fire of dialogue that most would have trouble following. He was already feeling the beginnings of his own panic attack as the girl's emotions took hold of him. It was only when he remembered that the emotions he felt were not his that the blonde managed to calm down by closing his eyes and taking several deep breaths, breathing in through the nose and out the mouth. It was a testament to how hard he had been working on not letting the emotions given to him through the bond overwhelm him like they had before. Now it only took a few seconds to regain control of himself. When he finished, the blonde opened his eyes and fixed Kusano with a concerned, but calm gaze as he pulled the still shivering girl close. The girl didn't resist, and seemed to have been waiting for this sign because she was quick to bury her face in his chest the moment he acted. On either side of him both Musubi and Akatsu began to stir. Ufa. Naruto-sama. Musubi blinked tiredly, rubbing her eyes with her left hand as she used her right to push the upper half of her torso up. While she did that, Akatsu also woke up, clearing the gunk out of her eyes as she tried to figure out what was going on. What's going on? Asked the more excitable of the two, before spotting Kusano. Ah, Ku-chan. What are you doing here? When the green girl just buried her head into Naruto's chest further, the blonde sighed. No, it seems that no matter what time of day it was, he just couldn't get a break. XOX. A ghost. Uzume said with an incredulous look on her face as she sat in her usual place across the table from Naruto. Over a little ways at the head of the table sat Mia, calmly eating the traditional Japanese-style breakfast of salmon, steamed rice, and tamagoyaki as she listened in on the conversation with mild amusement. Sitting next to the blonde shinobi himself was Kusano on the left-hand side, still shaking like a leaf and holding onto the blonde as if he was a lifeline, and Musubi on the right. It had been Akatsu, but when Musubi had pouted one day at not getting to sit next to him, Naruto had decided to have the two sit on his right side in shifts. For breakfast, it would be Musubi sitting next to him, Akatsu would get lunch, and the two would switch off every other day for dinner. It was a system that had proven effective enough so far, even though it was only 2 days old. It was the morning after Kusano had crawled into Akatsu's, Musubi's and Naruto's bed, and the blonde had just finished explaining to Mia and Uzume why Kusano had been found sleeping with him instead of Mia. The whole story had not taken that long. Naruto wasn't one for elaboration, at least not in this kind of instance. When writing his stories, the blonde knew how to embellish well, as his book sales can attest to, but when giving what amounted to a report the blonde was notoriously concise and to the point. Well, that explains it, Mia said, her left arm coming up to cover her mouth as she smiled at him. It wasn't hard for the blonde to tell from the silent shaking of her body that landlady of Maison Izumo was on the verge of giggling. For a moment there I thought you had snuck into my room and brought her there yourself. Naruto's right eye gained a violent twitch as he looked at the pleasantly smiling woman. I'm not a lolicon, you know. He told her, crossing his arms over his chest as he gave the lavender a pout. You foo. His response only seemed to incite further amusement from the landlady. Even Uzume began snickering at his misfortune. Thankfully neither Musubi nor Kusano understood the references, judging by the way they were tilting their heads in an almost identical fashion and blinking in confusion. At least, Naruto hoped to God they didn't understand. The last thing he needed was Musubi making some innocuous comment that caused the two women currently laughing at him even more of a reason to laugh at his expense. Naruto wasn't quite sure if Akatsu understood, however, even if she did the blonde was sure the snow woman wouldn't say anything. Which was good because he really didn't need to deal with any more people either poking fun of him, or possibly saying something that would cause him no small amount of embarrassment. Though Naruto had to admit there was something nice about the fact that Mia was at ease enough to tease him. The only other person who really did that was Uzume, but when she messed with him it was usually in the form of witty one-liners and small-time comments about his preference when it comes to the clothing of his Sekirei. That, or she just watched the chaos Musubi and Kusano caused build up around him. She seemed particularly fond of watching his life like it was some kind of movie or TV show. In comparison, when Mia teased him it was done with small innocuous comments that Naruto could easily respond to with his own salvo of return fire. There was also the fact that Mia was the only person among all the members of Maison Izumo that Naruto considered his equal. It had nothing to do with the fact that she was the owner of the house and therefore, technically the ruler of the household, it was in the way she carried herself. Perhaps better than anyone else, Naruto was sure Mia knew at least some of what he had experienced. If nothing else, she was the closest living human he knew of who had truly felt a loss so deep that it left a scar that was almost physical. In some ways, that made him feel closer to the purple-haired landlady than the other members of Maison Izumo. There was another reason he enjoyed her presence, however, and it brought him just as much peace as it did guilt. Mia was not bonded to him. He couldn't feel her emotions beyond what he saw through simple observation. That, more than anything else, made spending time with the beautiful yet often unassuming woman worth its weight in gold. Being able to hold a conversation and know that your thoughts and emotions are your own was becoming a commodity for the blonde. Sometimes he would be speaking with one of his Sekirei and he wouldn't even realize that the entire time he was speaking he had been parroting the thoughts and emotions of the girls he had bonded to. It made his time with Mia all the more important, because it not only allowed him to hold a conversation without losing himself, but it allowed him to begin expressing his own burgeoning emotions without them being affected by his girls. Uzume was also a viable option, he wasn't bonded to her, after all. But the female Sekirei was usually only around for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the end-of-the-day movie. Sometimes she would stick around and watch Musubi spar, or would poke fun at Naruto about his harem, but for the most part she was either asleep in her room or out at her job. Naruto didn't know what she did, but the few times he had seen her she looked quite exhausted. He would have wondered more about that, but it wasn't any of his business what the outgoing Sekirei did so he left it alone. With Uzume out of the house most of the time, and Kagari nowhere to be seen at any time of the day, he had turned to Mia. And she did not disappoint. He and Mia would often trade banter during the breaks after she had finished training Musubi for the day, so long as he wasn't doing something with his Sekirei. Or when they made dinner. Naruto had refused to allow the woman to make dinner on her own anymore. He knew she could, of course, the woman was a damn good cook. But he wasn't the type of person to just sit around the house doing nothing. Besides, he liked cooking. It was relaxing. Mia had contested him of course, claiming she would be out of a job if he cooked all the time. It was partly in jest, the woman owned Maison Izumo, after all. Naruto had simply countered her by saying that someone who did so much work shouldn't be forced to make dinner for everybody. In the end they had decided on a compromise. They would cook meals together on most nights, and on Sundays Naruto would cook by himself, while Mia cooked on Fridays. During the nights they both cooked, the two would often trade barbs back and forth. It was all in jest, of course. Neither of them actually said anything hurtful towards one another, and both enjoyed each other's company. Despite that, sometimes Mia simply ended up saying that caused a proverbial rain cloud to appear over the blonde's head. Like now. Anyways, the blonde continued, conceding the win to Mia as he got back to their original topic. He probably could have thought of something, but wasn't really in the mood for dealing with her. Akatsu-chan, Musubi-chan and I searched the house from top to bottom. We thought she might have seen a burglar or something. He honestly didn't think a burglar would be stupid enough to enter this house. Mia apparently had a fearsome reputation in this neighborhood as a woman not that be crossed. Go figure. However, we didn't find anyone, let alone a ghost. Naruto wasn't quite sure what to make of Kusano's little scare. On the one hand, he didn't think she was the type to lie. On the other, she had been complaining about how everyone else got to sleep with her Oni-chan but she didn't. It was possible that she had simply heard a strange noise and used the "I saw a ghost" trick to sleep with him. Naruto didn't think the girl was underhanded enough to actually use that kind of tactic, but perhaps the girl was sneakier than she looked. It wouldn't be the first time he had been conned into something by a pair of doe eyes, though the last time that had happened was several thousand years ago. He didn't think that was the case though. You simply couldn't fake the kind of panic he had felt coming from the green girl when she had rushed into his room last night. Naruto had known many people, some of whom had been the best actors he had ever seen. While acting panicked and frightened like Kusano had and still was as perfectly possible, faking the emotions involved was not. Emotions are closely linked to arousal of the nervous system with various states and strengths of arousal relating to a particular emotion. The simple fact was that while people can put on an act and pretend to feel a certain way, no amount of acting can fake genuine feelings and emotions. Naruto also had to consider the fact that Kusano was a child of only 9 years of age. Most of the people he had known who were capable of pulling off such incredible displays of emotion had been some of the kunoichi he knew, and some of the very, very talented actresses he had seduced. As a child, and one who wore her emotions on her sleeves for all to see, the idea that Kusano could put on an act was, quite frankly, laughable. Looking to his left, Naruto saw Kusano still shivering as she held a spoon in her hands. She still had yet to become capable of using chopsticks like everyone else. Yeah, he thought to himself, there was no way Kusano would be capable of such incredible acting. The ghost was a woman with long hair, wearing glasses. The child Sekirei stuttered in response to his words about not finding anyone. The description wasn't much to go on, but it had been dark and Kusano had likely been panicking, so Naruto didn't think much of it. Unbidden and unknowing of his thoughts, the green girl continued. She had a scary laugh too. Mia blinked. Did you say a girl wearing long hair and glasses? She asked, her lips moving downwards into a frown. On the other side of the table, Uzume perked up as she looked at the tiniest Sekirei in the group. Hey, that sounds like Uzume. There was a distinct tone of warning in Mia's voice when she spoke up. Fortunately for the busty brunette, the landlady did not use her Hania mask to deal with the other woman, most likely due to Naruto's presence. Ever since the Lavenderette had learned he was trying to recreate her mask, she had done everything humanly possible to make sure she did not use it around him. This had caused a few issues because there were some times when Mia simply could not rein in the others without a little terrifying reinforcement. For the most part though, it seemed that simple knowledge of what Mia could unleash within a moment's notice was enough to keep the obedience of her tenants. Naruto was also sure that she used the mask when he wasn't around, or perhaps even cornered the people she wanted to lecture in private so he wouldn't know about it, though that was pure conjecture on his part. The reaction of Uzume more or less confirmed what Naruto believed about Mia getting the others when he wasn't around and using her mask then. The Sekirei wearing the star shirt gained a sudden nervous look, her eyes traveled to behind Mia's shoulder and even though she saw nothing, they still looked nervous. Like no one I've ever heard of, she stated with a smile that was so forced Naruto was not sure it could truly be called a smile. Likewise, the incredibly frightened laughing the busty girl gave served to enhance the general look and feel of fear that permeated her. Naruto frowned as he looked at the pair, their words and actions confirming Kusano's theory of someone else being in the house at least. It was obvious these two knew about that extra guest, and while the blonde could not be sure, seeing as Kagari wasn't around to ask at the moment, but he was sure that the fire user knew of the house's hidden tenant as well. Not that Naruto could say for sure that Kagari knew anything. After all, he hadn't seen the guy for more than a few minutes at most, and that had been near the start of his tenure at Maison Izumo. The Eternal Shinobi wasn't quite sure if his theory was true or not, but he had been getting the distinct impression that the fire user was actively going out of his way to avoid him. It wasn't something that he could truly determine without ample proof, but some of the actions the man had been taking made him suspicious. Making sure to never stay for dinner, leaving extremely early in the morning and spending the rest of his time in his room, making some kind of excuse to leave the room whenever the blonde entered, it all added up to the fire user avoiding him, though the reasons for said avoidance were a complete mystery to Naruto. Yufufu, I'm sure that Ku-chan was just having a bad dream last night, Mia said with a soft giggle. She hid her smiling lips behind the long fabric of her kimono. It can happen when children stay up later than they usually do, she finished, and Naruto knew what she was referring to. One of the few things that had quickly become a tradition for the house was to watch a movie together. It had started the day after they had gone to the movies when Uzume had suggested they should do something like that again. Mia had, surprisingly enough, been the first to agree, and once Mia had spoken her piece Naruto's Sekirei couldn't help but add their assent to the plan. Even Akatsu had been rather adamant on another trip to the movie theater. And so, Naruto had capitulated. Not that there had been much of a choice, even if the blonde had the mental fortitude to resist the combined mo of his Sekirei, there were many more capable weapons that could work on him. Mia for one. While the woman did not scare him in the slightest, Naruto found his respect for the woman who owned Maison Izumo growing higher by the day. It had nothing to do with the friendly banter that had sprung up between the two, and everything to do with her ability to read the moods of others and respond accordingly. With the sole exception of himself, the Lavenderette had pretty much managed to peg everyone else's personalities within days after meeting them. That took skill. Even more impressive was that she seemed to be capable of multitasking her duties, relegating tasks appropriately while making sure she did not skimp out on her own work, and taking the time to spend with most of the tenants living under her roof individually as well as together. For him it was sitting out on the porch and drinking tea in silence, or cooking dinner and sharing in friendly banter. For Musubi it was sparring in the courtyard, Kusano it was helping her garden, though Naruto often joined in this activity as well, and for Akatsu it was making quiet conversation. Naruto didn't know what they spoke of, but if the looks Akatsu had given him when she and Mia talked were anything to go by, he had a few good theories to go on. The other problem, and the one that ensured Naruto would cooperate no matter what, was once again the bond. It wasn't just difficult to resist when all three of his girls wanted to do something, and their emotions were shining through the bond so fiercely Naruto often found himself getting swept away like a man on a life raft while caught in a hurricane. It was downright impossible. Even if the blonde had the ability to resist, he was not sure it would have mattered. The fact was when his Sekirei wanted something, Naruto would more often than not, give in. And so Naruto had given in. Of course, even though he had given in and agreed that they should all go to the movies again, the simple fact was that they couldn't go to the movie theater every night. Well, they could, but aside from the fact that movie theaters only played new and upcoming movies, it was also expensive. Naruto could pay for them all of course, but then the others might wonder where he got all his money from when he never worked. It wouldn't do for Mia to get suspicious and possibly search his room and find his Ika books and manuscripts. She was already suspicious enough of the fact that he had not missed a single payment on rent despite never going out to work. He had been able to play it off as his long-dead parents being rich and leaving them everything in their will. It also worked in well with his alias as a wanderer, but he knew that if he wasn't careful it wouldn't be long before Mia or someone else became suspicious of him. With going to the theaters every day out of the question, Naruto had decided on a compromise. The day they had decided to go see more movies and realized they couldn't do so every day, Naruto had gone out and bought a new Blu-ray DVD player and a large flat-screen television along with several dozen movies of various genres. It had been a bit costly, and he had been forced to once more explain it away to Mia, but he had managed to get out of a potentially dangerous situation with nothing more than a reprimand not to spend his money so callously. After that, the group had been able to finally see more movies without having to leave the comfort of their own home. They had all agreed to watching a movie each night after dinner in order to spend time together. Even though this new tradition was only 2 days old, movie time was beginning to look more and more like some kind of family gathering, where all the members of Maison Izumo, minus Kagari, could relax and spend more time together. Naruto had some mixed feelings about this. He would admit it felt nice to be a part of something like the new tradition of Maison Izumo. Sitting and relaxing with his Sekirei and the other 2 female members of the household was an enjoyable experience. The fact that every single one of the women, minus Kusano who wasn't old enough to fit into that category, were utterly beautiful made for some nice eye candy as well. But no matter how much fun he was having, that single question that Naruto had since he had first bonded to Musubi and learned of the Sekirei plan continued to burn in his mind. Just how long would it be until this life of peace and fun disappeared? XOX. The rest of breakfast went by fairly normally, not even Kusano clinging to him during the entirety of breakfast due to her fear of a possible ghost living in the inn was all that different. The clinging, not the fear. In fact, from the very first meeting Kusano had been clinging to Naruto like glue. The only time the girl was not with him was when either one of them were taking a bath, or when it was time for bed. Except for the last night when the girl had snuck into his bed, of course. After breakfast, Naruto found himself cleaning the dishes in the kitchen with his 3 Sekirei. The entire scene was one of controlled chaos, and an act which should have taken Naruto less than half an hour to complete himself was just now being finished in just a little under 1 hour. Despite the fact that the blonde could have accomplished the same task much faster, he was loath to actually interrupt the activity for reasons he was determined to ignore. They had managed to work out a kind of system between the 4 of them. Kusano would bring the dishes from the living room, carrying them over her head in much the same manner that she had with the clothing she had been putting in the dirty clothes hamper when helping Naruto clean his room. Despite the enthusiasm she was working with now, it had taken a bit of convincing before the green girl had even been willing to leave Naruto's side due to the whole ghost incident last night. Still, after convincing her to help via Naruto promising to protect her, the small Sekirei had taken to the task with great enthusiasm. Unlike last time where she had put the clothes away, this time whenever Kusano came into the room bearing a plate, a bowl, or some other form of tableware, she would hand it off to Naruto. Being the one who not only had the most experience in the kitchen, Naruto had given himself the task of cleaning the dishes. The water within the sink before him was filled nearly 3/4 of the way full with warm, soapy water that had mass amounts of foam floating upon its surface. The blonde had rolled up the sleeves of his long-sleeve orange shirt and was wearing a pair of orange rubber gloves. Whenever Kusano gave him one of the dishes to clean, he would dip it in the water and use the scrubber to clean it of all the food that was left over from breakfast. Most would probably find the task demeaning or boring, but Naruto, considering how long he had lived, it could almost be argued that he had grown up doing this kind of stuff. It was as easy to him as breathing. When he was done, the eternal shinobi handed off the now clean dining ware to Musubi, who was holding a large rag. Her task was drying, a task which she took to with the same enthusiasm she did with everything else. The girl was humming a small tune, one Naruto recognized from the movie they had watched yesterday, 101 Dalmatians. One amusing fact he had noticed about the girl was that despite the task she was doing, Musubi was still wearing her combat gloves. The final member of the 3.5-person cleaning crew was Akatsu. Her task was putting all of the dry dishes in their proper place within the kitchen, a task she took to with the same slow, methodical way she did just about everything. When Musubi handed off whatever piece of tableware she had just finished drying, Akatsu would hold it up so she could study it for nearly a full minute, before slowly walking over towards whichever cabinet, cupboard, or drawer the item she had was to be placed in. In most circumstances, such a slow method of returning objects to their rightful place would have been difficult, but due to how slow the rest of the cleaning process was, Akatsu's usually slow methods fit right at home here. By the time they had finished it was almost 9 o'clock. Naruto yawned a bit as he stretched his hands above his head and listened in quiet satisfaction as his vertebrae popped deliciously. Well, he started, bringing his hands back down to his side. Now that that's done I think I'm going to enjoy a nice hot bath. A bath, Musubi said, blinking for a second and tilting her head to the side, before an excited look took to her face. Can I join you, Naruto-sama? Would you like me to wash your back? She asked, practically bouncing in place as she no doubt thought about the last time they had taken a bath together. It had also been the only time they had taken a bath together. Naruto had refused to bath with any of his Sekirei after that, even though a part of him had felt guilty, another knew this was for the best. He needed to keep as much distance between himself and the three girls he had bonded to as possible. It was too late to do anything about the bonds now, and it was too late to take back Naruto's moment of weakness, back when he hadn't realized just how powerful this bond truly was, that had led to him and Musubi taking a bath together, but that didn't mean he couldn't start now. Not this time, Musubi-chan, Naruto said with a small shake of his head. A wry smile formed on his face as the fist fighter pouted. Besides, didn't you three already take a bath this morning after your spar with Mia? He asked, well aware that his first Sekirei had once again received some tutelage under the powerful swordswoman disguised as a landlady. The large lumps on her head from where Mia had hit her were proof enough. Oh, you're right, Musubi's voice actually sounded surprised, and Naruto didn't doubt that she was. He had been coming to the understanding that his first Sekirei, aside from being a scatterbrain, tended to forget a lot of things when it came to anything involving him, combat, or love. The girl's tendency to hyper-focus on those three subjects, while admirable, increased the already impressive forgetfulness she possessed. Honestly, Naruto was almost surprised that she had yet to inform one of the other residents about his powers of replication, though she could have forgotten about that incident as well. I forgot all about that, she continued, knuckling her head and poking her tongue out between her lips. My bad. I kind of figured as much, Naruto said in a dry tone. Ah! At the sound of her voice, everyone in the kitchen turned to look at Akatsu, whose eyes were focused on Naruto's, before she looked away, a light blush staining her cheeks. I wanted to wash Ashikabi-sama's back too, she admitted, looking down at the floor with a slightly downtrodden expression. Naruto had to bite his lip to keep from acquiescing to her demands. While it was difficult not to give in when Musubi asked him to do something, it wasn't impossible. A part of the reason for this, Naruto thought, was because so long as he gave an explanation of some kind, the excitable fist fighter was perfectly happy with whatever decision he made. In stark contrast, when it came to Akatsu, denying her anything was damn near impossible. Naruto thought it was because of her personality, she was so submissive and unobtrusive, she would do anything he asked without hesitation and without question. In short, she reminded him of Haku, the boy who had been both the first real enemy he'd ever had and also given him the most important lesson he could ever have, a lesson that would become his motto later on in life. It was that resemblance more than anything that made resisting Akatsu hard if not impossible. Naruto had to work his mouth for a few seconds as he ran through a quick meditation exercise to control his feelings and desires before he became capable of giving an answer. Sorry. He apologized, I was actually just going to take a really quick rinse, so it would be a waste for you guys to join me. Akatsu looked up at him, her head tilted to the side. I see, she nodded, seemingly to herself. Right. So Naruto trailed off for a moment and frowned. One wouldn't think saying, see you later, would be so hard, especially considering he would see them again as soon as he finished bathing. So I'll see you guys in a little bit, okay? Have a nice bath, Naruto-sama. Musubi replied to his words, waving with both hands. Beside her Kusano was mimicking the older Sekirei as she watched the blonde with a smile on her face. Well, Naruto noted that while the whole process of cleaning the dishes had taken away all of the fear his littlest Sekirei had been experiencing. That was a good enough reason to take the extra half an hour cleaning the dishes as far as Naruto was concerned. Right, the blonde murmured, lifting his left hand in a brief wave as he turned around and walked out of the kitchen, the living room, and into the hallway. The moment Naruto stepped into the wooden tiled hall, he almost ran into Kagari who had been walking to the entrance from his room. It was only thanks to the two of them halting in their tracks that they avoided a head-on collision. Hey, Kagari-san, Naruto greeted the only other male in the house with the same casualness that often came from the current playboy himself. I haven't seen you in a while. It was a complete understatement. The man had avoided him like the plague ever since their rescue of Kusano in the forest of her own creation. Naruto wasn't sure what this guy's problem with him was, but as always the blonde was able to put it out of his mind. It wasn't any of his business what Kagari's issues were, and if the man wanted to keep away from him, then so long as he did nothing to affect Naruto or his Sekirei, the blonde could acquiesce to the white-haired male's request. Sorry, Kagari started, his left hand twitching almost violently. His arm moved up for but a moment, before it moved back down. Naruto thought it was a conscious effort on Kagari's part not to scratch his chest, a habit he had noticed the fire user do when they had rescued Kusano. He also took note of the way Kagari's cheeks began to flush red and his breathing picked up. I've been really busy so I haven't had much time to stick around and relax. The man spoke in between breaths of air. Naruto frowned. Work. You look like you shouldn't even be out of your room, he stated, looking the other male up and down. Seriously Kagari-san, you look like shit. Are you sure you're feeling alright? Maybe you should call in or something and get some more rest. Even as he made the suggestion, Naruto tried to find a reason for the man's strange behavior. It could have been exhaustion. Naruto knew that aside from working at a host club, Kagari was also the guardian of unwinged Sekireis. While the blonde had no clue how many Sekireis there were, it still sounded like a full-time job, especially if the master of Yomi was the standard when it came to ashikabis. However, the blonde ruled that out almost immediately. If it were just exhaustion the man suffered from, then a good full 8 to 10 hours of sleep should cure that problem easily. Then again, Naruto was partially basing his theory off of a shinobi's physiology. Perhaps Sekirei had more in common with the average humans than he had originally thought. Could Kagari be sick? It was possible. Naruto still knew next to nothing of a Sekirei's internal structure and organs. He had assumed that if MBI had somehow made them stronger, then they would have gone all out and given them an incredible immune system that was capable of destroying and breaking down all forms of illness and poison. But if the fire user was sick, then perhaps that was not the case. Of course, being a creature of fire, Naruto also had to wonder if Kagari would be able to get sick regardless. While the blonde couldn't be sure, he was almost positive that the guardian of unwinged Sekirei ran an abnormally high temperature thanks to his elemental nature. If that were the case though, then any form of disease of illness on Earth would simply burn out of his system before it could infect him, and the same went with almost all types of poison. So if that was not the case, then what was? I'm fine. The blonde was brought out of his reverie by the sound of Kagari's voice. You don't need to concern yourself with me. He looked over at the only other male at Maison Izumo to see the fire user make to walk past him, only to take a stumble a second later and fall to his knees. Hey. Naruto was actually beginning to feel the stirrings of worry. The blonde took a step forward to see if the fire user was alright when he hesitated in his steps. Why did he care about this man? They had rarely ever spoken to each other before now. In fact, the only time they'd had any lengthy conversation had been back in the Arboretum, and that had only been about Kusano and the few questions the fire user had asked afterwards when he saw that Naruto had defeated Yomi. They knew nothing about each other, nothing serious anyways. Naruto knew that Kagari was Homura, or perhaps it was Homura that was Kagari. The semantics weren't much of an issue to someone like him who had lived under numerous identities in his life. The fact was he knew that Kagari was the guardian Sekirei and had the ability to manipulate fire, but other than that the only thing Naruto knew about the man was that he worked at a host club. Naruto was likely even more of a mystery to Kagari. This was done on purpose, of course. The blonde had not told anyone about his true past and secrets. Mia might know a little about him due to his own moments of weakness, Musubi also knew a bit, but no one else, and he intended on keeping things that way. So then why did he care? Maybe it was all of the emotions the bond had brought out. Naruto was well aware of his own emotions emerging. Denying his own feelings when they had already caused him to make a number of rookie mistakes would be the height of stupidity. Still, he hadn't realized they had already come so far out in the open that he was concerned about someone he barely even knew. They were affecting him more than he thought. That still didn't quite explain why he was concerned for the fire user. Maybe it was because they were living together. Yes, that must be it. He and Kagari might not be friends, but they were tenants living under the same roof, and as such it was only right to feel concerned about your fellow housemate. With all of his thoughts put in place and his mind set, Naruto finished taking the few steps that set him apart from Kagari. It hadn't been more than a few seconds since the blonde had his small inner debate, and in that time the fire user had managed to rise to his feet, albeit he was leaning against the wall, one hand clutched to his chest, a grimace on his face, and was breathing quite heavily. It was just proof to Naruto that the guy was not feeling well and should be in bed. Reaching out, Naruto was just about to place his hand on the other man's shoulder and suggest he head back to his room while he made something light for him to eat. However, the moment he made contact, Kagari's own hand lashed out and slapped his away. Naruto had seen the move coming the moment Kagari's shoulder twitched to telegraph it, and by then the blonde had already pulled back, jumping backwards several feet. The very moment his feet touched the ground, the blonde shinobi was already standing in a loose combat stance, his chakra thrumming as he prepared to summon a kunai. Kagari also seemed to have gained a new life of his own, straightening up and glaring at Naruto with an intense look that the blonde couldn't quite place. It was a combination of anger, hatred, and disgust, though Naruto didn't think the look was actually directed at him. Namely because there was another emotion in the man's eyes, one that almost took Naruto by surprise. Shame. What the hell was that about, Kagari? Asked Naruto, shaking his head to rid himself of the strange emotions he was feeling. He must have been getting better at controlling himself because it only took a second before the boiling pot of emotions was brought down to a simmer. Sorry, Kagari grimaced as he seemed to realize what he was doing. His left hand came up and rubbed his chest for only a moment before it was forced back down. I don't like people touching me, he continued. Then you probably should have said something before, Naruto told him with a frown. He didn't believe Kagari for a second. There had been something else that caused him to react like that. The man was definitely hiding something. Narrowing his eyes for a moment, the blonde shook his head and dispelled his previous thoughts. Of course the man was hiding something, he was a Sekirei. Maybe his anger had something to do with that, the blonde began to theorize. Perhaps Sekirei only liked it when their ashikabas touched them. No, Naruto frowned as he realized something. If that were the case, then Musubi would never allow Mia to touch her. He would have made a theory that it might be because they're both females, but then, he and Kagari were both males, so that couldn't be it. Then again, perhaps that could be why. Maybe Sekirei males were more aggressive than the females. It was possible, he supposed. Though that theory still left a lot of unanswered questions. Like, why he was reacting so badly to Naruto when he wasn't even a Sekirei. If this was some kind of territorial dispute, then he could see why Kagari might be reacting like this. There were a lot of species of animals that were very territorial, perhaps Sekirei were like that. Maybe whatever MBI had done to them had brought out humanity's dormant animal instincts. Maybe Kagari felt another alpha was encroaching on his territory. No, that couldn't be it either. Naruto wasn't a Sekirei, and therefore there was no need to get territorial. It wasn't like he could steal away the man's potential mate or whatever it was that an ashikabi was to a Sekirei, which was really one of the only reasons most males got territorial in the first place. So then what was it? The blonde shook his head as he realized he was overthinking things again. What did he care if Kagari was feeling territorial? Naruto wasn't a Sekirei and therefore it wasn't any of his business. I'm sorry, Kagari apologized, and it seemed to take quite a bit of effort to get that much out. Was the fire user really that upset with him that he sounded like he was choking on his own words? I'll try to be more considerate in the future. Straightening out, the guardian of unwinged Sekirei seemed to gain his second wind and began walking past Naruto, making sure not to even so much as brush against the blonde even in his haste to leave. Now, you'll excuse me, I really must be going. Naruto frowned as he watched Kagari head over to the entrance of the house, pull on his shoes, and leave. He thought about going after the man, stopping him, and forcing him back into his room. The blonde was sure Mia would not like it when she saw Kagari come home looking like the Walking Dead he was sure to be a few hours from now. But after thinking it over decided not to. After all, what Kagari did in his own time was none of Naruto's business. Still, that had to be one of the strangest encounters he'd ever had. XOX. After the incident with Kagari, Naruto had finally managed to make it to the bathhouse, clean himself off, and get a little bit of time to himself. He had to admit, if there was one thing about Japan that he had truly missed, it was most definitely the baths. For the Japanese, bathing was not truly a means of getting clean but relaxing. An important fact about taking a bath when in Japan is that the body must be thoroughly cleaned before one enters the bath, and only after that may they enjoy the bath itself. His time in the bath had not been as long as he would have liked. But then, so far Naruto had been unable to truly enjoy the bathhouse that Maison Izumo offered thanks to his Sekirei. They were a lively bunch, that was for sure. Strangely enough though, they were not with him at the moment. Naruto had been about to make lunch when Musubi told him she wanted to make him something special. He had been a little hesitant, not because he thought her cooking was bad or anything. In fact, he had rather enjoyed her curry, but because it was something he usually did to relax. Unfortunately, he had once again underestimated both the power of the bond between them, as well as the excitable girl's mo. When Naruto had been faced with the combination of the girl's almost extreme desire to make him something and a look that somehow managed to combine both raw sex appeal and innocence, the blonde immortal had found himself completely unable to do anything than give in. The fact that all three of his Sekirei had ganged up on him only made it that much more impossible for him to resist. At the moment though, they weren't cooking. When Uzume had heard that they had decided to cook, she had told them that they needed something special to wear before going to the kitchen. The busty Sekirei in the star shirt had then taken his three Sekirei up to her room where they had been locked in for the past 10 minutes. Naruto didn't quite know what they were doing, but he was fine with that. He had something he had been wanting to do since Kusano had come into his room claiming to have seen a ghost, and he unfortunately could not do it with anyone else present. Well, he could. Akatsu had already seen this ability, but Naruto didn't want Musubi or Kusano to see it. One of them was unable to keep a secret. She had already proven that by coming close to revealing his shadow clones several times before Naruto managed to stop her. Nowadays he kept his eyes on Musubi just to make in case her mouth ended up getting the best of her again. Kusano had yet to be proven untrustworthy, but then again she was also a child. Children were notorious for being unable to keep secrets. Sitting down in a cross-legged position with his back against the tree he had first seen Kusano, Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His breathing began to slow. He was breathing so slowly in fact that unless someone was really looking for the rise and fall of his chest, they would assume he was dead. As Naruto's breathing began to slow, his body became still. Not stiff, but relaxed to the point where all movement simply ceased. The reason for this was because in order to gather the natural energy in order to enter Senin Modo, one had to remain perfectly still. This was because the natural energy of the world was highly unstable and not meant to be used by humans, so in order for a human to gather the natural energy they had to harmonize themselves with the world around them, to become at peace and one with nature. It was a feat that very few could actually accomplish, and should one fail to properly gather the natural chakra they risked turning into a toad statue. To date, only 3 people had ever managed to earn the title of Senin, or sage. Naruto was one of those people. More than that, he was what one could call a true master of senjutsu. Becoming one with nature was one of the few things in this world that had kept the blonde sane during those long years of loneliness. More than his hobbies, more than the sex, it was his harmonizing with nature that brought him the closest he could now come to feeling at peace with himself. Due to his constant gathering of senjutsu and harmonizing with nature, it only took him exactly 1 second to gather enough natural chakra to enter Senin Modo. As Naruto let the natural energy begin to flow through him, the blonde could already feel the changes taking place within him. The natural energy flooding his body began to meld with his own chakra, enhancing and increasing incredibly potent chakra to previously unimagined levels. It was always interesting to feel how natural energy melded with his own chakra. It had, in all honesty, been a surprise to the blonde that he could still use senjutsu chakra, though Naruto just chalked that up to the fact that the only requirement to learn the sage arts was a high chakra capacity, and he had that in spades. For a moment, Naruto allowed himself to bask in the feeling of being one with nature. When he had used Sennin Moto to determine that Kusano was in the Arboretum, he had not been allowed the luxury of enjoying the feel of harmony that came with gathering natural energy. He had not had the time. But now that there was no danger to be had, no timetable to push him along, the blonde took the time to properly cherish his bond with nature. Like it was every time Naruto entered Sennin Moto, it was amazing to feel the incredible closeness that he now felt with everything around him. Naruto was the tree at his back, the grass under his body, the flowers sitting in the garden. He was one with all of it just as it was one with him. It was moments like these where Naruto could truly be at peace. However, Naruto did have a reason for entering Sennin Moto beyond wanting to become one with the natural world around him. And with the knowledge of what he had to do in his mind, Naruto began to get to work. With Sennin Moto allowing him to sense the chakra of others, Naruto began to feel out the chakra of those living at Maison Izumo. It was surprisingly easy to sense these Sekirei, Naruto noted. Perhaps it was because they didn't have the same amount of control over their chakra as the shinobi of his era, or maybe they just all had more chakra, but each one of them burned brightly to his senses, like a couple dozen stars flaring brilliantly in the night. He could sense the Sekirei all around him, not just at Maison Izumo, but every Sekirei within a 34-kilometer radius. There were 28 in total, each one with a different feel to them. Naruto didn't focus on those ones that were farther out, he could feel them, but his focus was on the house near to him. He could easily feel his own Sekirei. If anything, he could feel them far more clearly than he ever had before, and not just their presence within his senses, but their emotions as well. He could feel Musubi's giddiness at something Uzume was showing her, it was sure to impress her Ashikabi. From Kusano he could feel her excitement at what she had been given, undoubtedly her Oni-chan would like it. Along with those two he could also feel Akatsu, and her desire and hope that her Ashikabi-sama would like what she had on. So Uzume was giving them something to wear. How odd. Uzume was also with his Sekirei, a bright force within his mind. Her emotions were much more indistinct. He was not bonded to her so it was hard to tell what she was feeling, but the foremost emotion in her mind was amusement. Perhaps she was planning some kind of prank on him. If so he wondered what kind of clothes she had given his girls. Redirecting his attention elsewhere, Naruto searched out the other presences in the house. Mia was in her room, her emotions unusually solemn. Surprisingly enough, he could feel her a lot more easily than he could Uzume. The first thing he noted was that she was strong, ridiculously so in fact. During the Fourth Great Shinobi War, Naruto had fought with monsters, people who were so powerful they could barely be considered human. The Sandaime Reikage with his incredible chakra capacity, damn near unbreakable skin, and enough strength to be capable of going toe-to-toe with Gyuki on even grounds. Kabuto, with his own version of Sennin Moto granted to him from his training with the snake summons of Raichi Cave. The Kinjin Kyodai and their incredible chakra capacity, ability to use some of Kurama's chakra, and the treasured tools of the Raikudo Sennin, Benihisago and Kohaku no Johai. Sasuke and his potent chakra and powerful Mangekyo abilities, Tobi and his strange Jikuken ninjutsu, and many, many others. He had seen and fought all manner of powerhouses, each with their own unique abilities that made them deadly in battle. Mia's power was enough to rival the one person Naruto had not been able to beat on his own. Uchiha Madara had been on another level from all of the others that the blonde had ever fought. His chakra was more powerful than anything he had ever felt in another living being, his Mangekyo abilities were unreal, his skills in ninjutsu were on a level that no one else could have ever hoped to achieve. The man had been power incarnate, and when combined with his Rinnegan and the abilities of Senju Hashirama, Naruto had been out of his league. It had only been with the help of Killer Bee that he had managed to not only survive that encounter, but also permanently seal the man within a powerful Fuinjutsu of Naruto's own make. The fact that Mia actually had that much raw power to her was not just incredible, but also incredibly terrifying. Naruto still had more power than she did, but that was more a stint of his curse than due to his own natural chakra capacity. Still, just because the woman was crazy powerful didn't mean anything. If nothing else, Naruto could rest secured in the knowledge that she was his friend and wouldn't try to hurt his Sekirei. Naruto soon brought his attention elsewhere, not wanting to intrude on the woman any more than he already had. For some reason, sensing her through his senjutsu like that made him feel dirty, like he had intruded on something private. Finally, the blonde's attention moved towards where it had been going to from the start. The last resident of Maison Izumo and, if his theory was correct, Kusano's ghost. The last person he could feel was definitely a Sekirei, a woman if he was judging the feel of her power right. She had a much odder feel to her power than the others, it was a little weaker than the other Sekirei in Maison Izumo, and it felt less alive. No, maybe not so much less alive as it felt partly mechanical. Naruto couldn't quite figure out why her power felt like it was part machine, especially since he couldn't actually feel machines through senjutsu, but every time the blonde tried to come up with something, that was the only word he could think of to describe the feel of her power. Shaking his head, Naruto began to confirm all of the facts he had now managed to confirm by finding Maison Izumo's hidden resident. 1. There was another person who was living with them and they were in hiding. Naruto wasn't sure why they were hiding, but considering he hadn't seen hide nor hair of them despite having lived at the boarding house for several days, the woman's need to hide must have been caused by something big. Not that he cared, it was none of his business after all. 2. Mia and Uzume, and most likely Kagari as well, knew this person was living with them. This didn't bother Naruto much, they obviously had their reasons for harboring the woman, just as they had their reasons for not telling him and the others. 3. That meant they were participating in keeping the woman's existence a secret. And 4. Whoever this person was a Sekirei. Now he just had to decide what he should do about this new knowledge. He could just ignore it, of course. Mia was obviously keeping the Sekirei's presence hidden for a reason, and there were many possible reasons that Naruto could think up off the top of his head. Anything from being on the run from MBI to being potentially dangerous to herself or those around her. If that were the case, then perhaps leaving the girl along would be the best option. Naruto did not feel comfortable knowing that there was someone else hidden within Maison Izumo, however, and so the first option was unusable as far as he was concerned. That meant he could either go with option 2 or option 3. Option 2 involved talking to Mia and asking her about it, a possible option but one that came with its own problems. For one thing, if Naruto told the landlady that he knew there was another Sekirei hidden in a room somewhere, not only would he have to explain why he was snooping around, he would also have to tell the woman about his ability to sense Sekirei. That meant option 2 was also out. Naruto had every intention of keeping his powers and abilities as much of a secret as possible for as long as possible, which hopefully meant he would never have to reveal them. That left the last option, confronting the person hiding in the boarding house on his own. This was the choice Naruto was leaning towards the most. Maybe Musubi's excitability was affecting him more than he thought, or maybe he was just growing less cautious as more and more of his emotions came to the fore. Back before the Fourth Great Shinobi War, the blonde had never been one for caution and planning. He had been a man of action, appoint him at the enemy and let him go kind of guy. In many ways, he had been a lot like Musubi. Naruto didn't know if the girl in question was somehow bringing out the old him, or if maybe her own emotions were still reflecting themselves onto him. What he did know was that he disliked the idea of having an unknown person living with him in the same house. Option 3 it was. Shutting down his Senin Moto to its barest settings, the rings around his eyes faded for the most part. When he opened them they were still his normal blue, but the pupils had a bar-like quality to them. It was something he had worked out for himself, an ability he had learned when he wanted the sensing abilities afforded to him through the use of nature chakra, but not the strength that came from entering Senin Moto. By removing almost all of the senjutsu chakra from his body except for the area around his eyes, Naruto could retain his ability to sense and see chakra. Even better, when Naruto was in this mode, what he called Seiji no Buben Tenkan, partial sage transformation, he could gather natural energy while moving. This was due to the fact that he already had natural energy in him, and therefore a built-in resistance to the energy itself that prevented him from turning into a toad statue. It was an impressive creation, if he did say so himself, and one that showed how far he had come with his senjutsu training. Naruto was sure that not even the toad sages themselves, Fukusaku and Shima, would have been able to come up with an ability like this. Following the energy signature, Naruto went back into the house, up the stairs, and turned right. He found himself staring at the wall on the right next to the stairs on the second floor. The blonde frowned for a moment as he let his hold over the nature chakra fade, his eyes going back to normal. He looked at the wall for several seconds, wondering how he had missed such an obvious secret entrance. Seriously, aside from the fact that the wall had very seams running along it on all sides that showed the wall could be moved, most likely by spinning it around via some kind of spokes or some other kind of rotation device, there was also the fact that the second floor of Maison Azuma was missing a room. The room Naruto shared with Akatsu and Musubi was number 202, Uzume's room was 203, and there was one more empty room after that, number 204. That meant the second floor of Maison Azuma was missing the room number 201, a fact that Naruto felt he should have noticed long before now. Of course, Naruto couldn't take all the blame here. A lot had happened, after all. With so much having happened in such a short time, it was a wonder the blonde's skills of observation had been able to make as many connections as they had in regards to the other residents, particularly with Mia, as it is. It wasn't like Naruto had been given the time to truly think about why Maison Azuma seemed to be missing a room. Still, he felt that this was something he should have noticed right from the onset. A missing room was such an obvious clue that there was more going on than meets the eye that Naruto should have at least questioned the fact that there was no room number 201. It was another rookie mistake, and it made Naruto realize just how badly his own skills had deteriorated. Truthfully, it made him worried. If he could make such an obvious mistake, then what else had he missed? And not just in regards to Maison Azuma and the Sekirei plan, but everything else in his life as well. With a small frown and a shake of his head, Naruto dispelled those thoughts. There was nothing he could do about those other issues right now. However, there was something he could do to correct the current one now facing him. Placing one of his hands on the left side of the wall, Naruto pushed. Much like he had expected, there was some kind of spoke, or perhaps a rod that had simply been placed in the middle of the wall that allowed for rotational traction. In either case, the wall was quick to yield to his push, rotating around the center so that the left side where his hand had been providing the force moved inwards while the right moved out towards him. Seeing the darkness of the room before him, penetrated only by several lights that Naruto recognized as being from a number of monitors, the blonde walked in through the secret entrance. Much like Naruto had expected, the small room was very poorly lit. The single light fixture that Naruto could see on the ceiling was going unused. Instead, all of the illumination came from the many dozens of monitors that were stacked along the walls in columns and rows around the three sides of the rooms that the door was not located on. Naruto could count at least 24 computer monitors of various shapes and sizes splayed along the wall in what could only be called organized chaos. Despite the fact that the monitors looked like they had just been thrown together with no regards to aesthetics, the blonde could tell that there was actually a purpose to their placement. Interspersed among the monitors, Naruto recognized box-like modems and hard drives, all of which he recognized as belonging to some of the more advanced computer systems in the world. The very little amount of floor space available in the room was being covered by a lumpy futon, which had emptied packages of snack food and cans from what Naruto recognized as energy drinks. In short, the entire room looked like a hacker's paradise. Sitting at the far end of the room, next to one of the larger monitors, was a woman. Much like all of the other Sekirei he had met, this one was quite beautiful. She looked to be in her early to mid-20s, dressed all in white. Her outfit was some kind of long dress with a higher than normal neckline. It was bare at the shoulders, and slid up the sides nearly to her hips with a small diamond-shaped gap at the top of her breasts to expose just a hint of her cleavage. She had two sleeve-like additions that apparently attached to her dress underneath her armpits and hung low over her hands. She had dull auburn hair that fell low down her back and was framed on either side by a pair of plaits that she had thrown over her shoulders, and her eyes were concealed by a pair of large round glasses that hid a pair of dark red eyes. She looked surprised, her mouth open in shock as the upper half of her body turned to face him. However, the moment her eyes landed on Naruto, her face turned a deep shade of red that was partially hidden by the low lighting. "Wow, this is an interesting place you have here," Naruto commented lightly, no sign of stress in his voice or on his face. It was a carefully constructed mask that he had perfect when he was not feeling quite as calm as he wished, and right now, the blonde was downright unnerved. Looking at the various monitors scattered around the room, Naruto saw that many of them were showing images of the various areas of the house, including the tree where he had been sitting just moments prior. Just how long has she been spying on him? Was she some kind of spy? Or perhaps a double agent or something? No, if she were a double agent then she would have revealed herself to him and tried to ingratiate herself with him. He could also rule out her being a spy. Mia would never let a spy into her house. Unless of course, she was a spy working for Mia herself, but if that were the case then the woman before him would not be spying on the tenants of the house, would she? Well, maybe she would spy on him. He knew that Mia was curious about him, it wasn't obvious to anyone but him, but part of the reason the landlady spent so much time with him was because she wanted to learn more about him. While Naruto was able to avoid giving anything truly incriminating away, he had allowed more to slip out than he initially intended, especially after that night Seo had shown up at Maison Izumo. Since then the woman had made it a bit more obvious that she was curious about him. Perhaps his refusal to reveal his own secrets had made her ask this woman to see what she could find out about him. However, even as Naruto thought that he noticed another monitor that showed Mia sitting Cieza on the floor in front of a shrine. Her head bowed as smoke from the incense she was burning drifted lazily in the air in front of her, and immediately ruled the thought of the landlady having this Sekirei spying on him out. She would never allow someone to spy on her, so it was unlikely she even knew what this woman was doing. You know, it's rude to be spying on people, especially when you're living with them, he told the woman, whose breathing had begun to pick up. She was taking deep breaths, her shoulders visibly heaving even in the low lighting. Naruto frowned as he noticed that, but put it out of his mind for the moment. He took another step forward. So may I know the name of the Sekirei that's been spying on me? He asked. Said Sekirei blinked, her expression managing to convey surprise even as the pace of her breathing began to increase. Matsu, she rasped out, sounding like she had run a marathon in 100-degree heat. The flush on her cheeks were beginning to get brighter, the redness actually glowing within the barely illuminated room. Well, Matsu, Naruto began as he took another step forward. He was on a roll now, his mind determining the quickest way to get the information he wanted from her, which was why she was spying on him. There were a number of interrogation techniques he could use, anything from mental and physical torture to seduction and psychological word games. Since the person he was interrogating was a Sekirei, he had decided to go with psychological word games. He would have gone with seduction, but wasn't sure it would work on a Sekirei. I suppose since you were so kind as to give me your name, it's only right I give you mine. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, the woman interrupted as she turned to him. She was using her arms to hold the upper half of her body up, but they were trembling so badly they looked like they might give out at any moment. Age, 18, height, 195 centimeters, weight, 91 kilograms, build, lean athletic, hair color, blonde, eyes, blue, Sekirei he's winged. Number 88, Musubi, number 07, Akatsu, the so-called scrapped number, and number 108, Kusano. Has only been in Shinto Tito for exactly 9 days, but has already winged 3 Sekirei and has earned the title of miracle worker due to his winging of former scrapped number, Akatsu. On top of that, very little is known about Naruto other than that he is a wanderer who has visited a number of different countries within the past several years. Naruto's hand twitched, almost summoning a kunai into it. If he had been wary about this girl before, now he was downright paranoid. While most of that information would have been easy for her to obtain since she had apparently been spying on him for some time, some of that was not. As far as he knew there had been no mention of Akatsu being a former scrapped number during any of the conversations he'd had in Maison Izumo. Which meant she had been doing far more than just spying on him while he was at Maison Izumo. The only good thing Naruto could determine from this was that Matsu had said he was a complete mystery, meaning whatever information she had managed to gather, she had only been able to find the information he himself had spread for others to follow. That was good, it meant that the people under his, employ were doing their job and eliminating any and all information and images that could be found on him that he didn't want. Still, it was almost negligible when compared to the fact that this Sekirei had been spying on him for so long. During the woman's recounting of all the information she had on him, Matsu had begun to crawl forward on her hands and knees, stopping when she was just barely a foot in front of him. Her eyes never left his as she tilted her head and looked up at him, and it was now, when she was this close to him that Naruto realized there was something wrong with her. No, not something wrong with her, something familiar. He had seen this kind of reaction before. In Musubi just before he winged her. And it was in that moment of realization that Naruto noticed everything else about her that he had been focused on acquiring his information to notice before. The way her cheeks flared brilliantly within the darkened chamber as she looked at him. Her half-lidded eyes hidden underneath the fringe of her bangs and behind those round spectacles. That seductive way she was sitting, leaning forward on her hands and knees with her arms pushing her cleavage together. The scent of her arousal filling his nose, a heady scent that made Naruto's head spin. It wasn't long after taking in these observations that his eyes widened in realization. In other words, a very mysterious person, Matsu continued as Naruto took a cautious step back. As she spoke, her left hand came up to press her palm against her breast, right above her head. You, who are a complete mystery to everyone, is the Ashikabi of this Sekirei, number 02, Matsu. She crawled forward another step, and Naruto took another step back. Now, she said, her eyes taking on a gleam that was actually beginning to unnerve the blonde. Please calm this hot body with your thick, hot, DNA. Finally, she pounced. What the hell? Naruto shouted as Matsu sprung towards him from her position on the floor. She flew into the air, her hands in front of her, and her fingers making strange grasping motions that Naruto could recognize for miles away. They were the same motions that Jiraiya made whenever he was thinking something perverted. With a very many shriek, Naruto dove under the flying Sekirei seeking to pounce on him. Rolling over his left shoulder, the blonde kicked back up to his feet and spun around to face this new and perverted threat. You. Matsu laughed as she landed back on her hands and feet, crouching down like some kind of animal. Her left hand came up and grabbed the side of her glasses, adjusting them and causing the light from the monitors to reflect off of them in a gleam that made the woman look surprisingly ominous. Don't play so coy, Naruto-tan. Come on. Let me gain my wings so we can begin the experimentation. At the word, experimentation, Naruto felt a shiver tingle down his spine. There was something creepy about the way she said that. A surprise, considering he was almost sure the woman was not talking about doing something vile and atrocious to him like, say, cutting open his insides to see what made him tick. Then again, his theories on what she did intend on doing to him could be considered vile and atrocious depending on who you asked. As the redhead began charging towards him like some kind of animal, Naruto's mind began working at the speed of a supercomputer. He needed to find some way to restrain this Sekirei before she could get her pervy little hands on him. God, Naruto was beginning to wish he kept more ninja tools on him. Why did he stop carrying his ninja wire? Looking around at the room, the blonde attempted to find some object or implement he could use to restrain this girl. A curse escaped his lips when he realized that, despite the utter mess Matsu's room was in, there were no loose wires or cords that he could use. That sucked. If there was at least a few, or even just one, loose wire or cord available to him, then Naruto could have this strange, perverted woman tied up before she could say Sekirei. Unfortunately, there were none, and Naruto no longer carried ninja tools on him at all times. Why would he need to? It wasn't like there was anything out there in the world that could actually kill him. Oh, how he wished he could take those words back now. While this woman might not be able to kill him, there were definitely a number of unpleasant, or pleasant, things she could do to him that Naruto was not quite sure she wanted to be doing. Just how had this situation fallen so far out of hand? All he had wanted to do was find out who was spying on him, confront them, and get answers to the questions he had. Had he known that there was a perverted Sekirei reacting to him like this, Naruto would have stayed as far away as possible. He already had enough shit to deal with in his life. He didn't need another Sekirei adding to his problems. Thank you very much. Once more the woman made to pounce, and Naruto's body tensed as he made to duck. Matsu seemed to have anticipated this, because rather than jump into the air, she moved lower, as if she was expecting him to try and roll under her. Had Naruto any intention of doing that, the results would have been the exact opposite of what he wanted, him tumbling into the girl in a heap of limbs, which would have given Matsu the perfect opportunity to do whatever it was she wanted to do to him. Thankfully, Naruto was much better at anticipating the movements of his enemies during battle and planning on the fly accordingly. It had been one of the biggest factors that had made him known as the most unpredictable shinobi in the world. While this particular situation wasn't actually a battle, it was close enough that Naruto's mind was already in his battle mode and he had already anticipated what the woman before him would do. Rather than roll into the woman like Matsu obviously wanted, Naruto's tensed legs extended themselves into a push. The redhead, already moving forward pretty quickly, was unable to do anything as Naruto flipped over her, his body spinning like a corkscrew before landing on his feet near the entrance. As for Matsu herself, she had actually tried to change the direction she was moving in order to nab the blonde, but her forward momentum had already carried her too far and she was left to smack directly into one of the many monitors in his room. Ow! Naruto only glanced at the woman for a moment, seeing her busy rubbing her now sore face due to her running face first into a monitor. That was as good a distraction as any, and the blonde made sure to use that time wisely by bolting from the room. Hey! Come back here. I just want to do a little experimentation. Naruto ignored the shouts coming from the room, instead choosing to run down the hall at breakneck speeds. He didn't quite know where he was going yet, but he figured the first thing he needed to do was get away from the woman that had just tried to rape him. The windows moved by him in a blur as the blonde ran. Belatedly, he realized that the end of the hall was a dead end, and it probably would have been a better idea to actually go down the stairs. Unfortunately, Naruto wasn't quite in his right mind at the moment, and thus the thoughts only occurred after the fact. It was just as Naruto was coming up on Uzume's room that the door opened and said star-shirted female walked out with a large grin on her face. At least, there was a large grin on her face until she looked over and saw Naruto bulldozing his way towards her. The slow widening of the brunette's eyes were the only sign of surprise she was able to give before the blonde ran smack into her. He would have tried changing directions, or at least jumping over the girl before crashing into her, but neither of those options were possible. If Naruto used chakra to cease his forward movement, he was more than likely to simply rip the planks of the floor off the ground, and the hallways simply wasn't high enough for him to vault over her. Get out the way! Was the only thing Naruto was able to shout before plowing into the busty young woman before. With a surprised squawk, the two took a tumble to ground, rolling and tumbling along the hard wooden tiling. When they finally came to a stop, Naruto was on top of Uzume, straddling the girl's hips with his hands on either side of his head. Uzume opened the eyes she had closed when they fell down, which soon widened when they saw just how close Naruto's face was to hers. Their noses were nearly touching. Naruto opened his mouth to say something, anything that could get rid of the embarrassing and awkward atmosphere. Hi. He said somewhat weakly. Seriously, did he really just run from one girl trying to rape him and end up running over another? This entire situation was beginning to reach such ridiculous proportions that Naruto wasn't quite sure what to do. His life was beginning to look more and more like one of the very novels he wrote. And just how did his life end up like this anyways? All Naruto wanted was to live his life without being bothered by the stupidity of humanity. Was that too much to ask? Apparently so, because not only had he gotten himself caught up in the very thing he wanted to avoid, but he had also essentially created his own harem and had another woman that had just finished trying to rape him like the kind of female characters he would expect to find in an eroge. This had to be karma. Yes, that must be it. No, not even karma could be this bad. It had to be a curse god. That had to be it. There was a curse god after him. It was probably a little girl wearing a frilly red dress, green ribbons and liked to spin around. There was no other explanation. Only someone like that could possibly curse him like this. Hey, Uzume chuckled, bringing his attention away from thoughts on curse gods and references that few people would probably understand. The busty young woman looked like she had recovered, at least partially. There was a bit of a blush on her face, most likely due to the fact that she had a male on top of her currently straddling her hips in a way that would no doubt look incredibly sexual from the perspective of any onlooker. Still, she was also giving him a teasing grin, one that did not bode well for Naruto. I didn't expect you to try and seduce me so soon, bro, she said with a wink, her grin turning saucy. You do know that I already have an ashikabi, don't you? If you really want to get in my bed, Then you'll also have to seduce them, and unfortunately my Ashikabi doesn't live here, so that's not going to be happening anytime soon. Naruto took several seconds as he pondered her words. It wasn't that he hadn't heard them, but more that he was still dealing with the fact that his life seemed to be descending into madness before his very eyes. However, when the blonde finally did register what was she said, his own eyes widened and he jumped off the beautiful Sekirei as if burned. Gah. I'm so sorry, Uzume, Naruto apologized, bowing haphazardly. I didn't mean to crash into you like that. I was just trying to get away from. There you are. Naruto froze in fear, his body stiffening as he turned around almost against his will to see the person he had been running from closing the distance between them, her arms outstretched, hands making the same grasping motions as before. Her breathing was just as harsh as before, perhaps even heavier than it had been when she had first started trying to get him. Matsu seemed to be almost in a trance as she moved towards him, walking slowly and with stumbling footsteps like she was some kind of zombie, only instead of wanting to eat his brains, she wanted to rape him. Uzume took her eyes off Naruto and turned to see who this newcomer was, and her eyes quickly went wide with surprise. Matsu! She shouted, her voice sounding like an odd combination between shock and panic. What are you doing out of your room? Phew. Matsu wasn't listening to the surprised girl's cries, indeed the redhead seemed to have not even noticed the other female in the room as she stalked towards the blonde shinobi. Though Naruto himself did note it and store the information in the back of his mind for posterior inquiry. Hopefully he would be able to make it out of this situation in such a way that allowed him to ask his questions with both his life and his purity intact. Oh, wait. He had lost his purity a long time ago. Damn. Well, hopefully he would be able to get out of this without losing what little purity, none, he had. Come on, Naruto. Quell this body with your DNA, your hot, thick, white strands of DNA. Naruto shuddered at the words. It was quite obvious that this girl was not talking about a kiss. Was this what females everywhere had faced when Jiraiya had been alive? If so, it was no wonder the man could never get laid except for when he paid a woman astronomical amounts of money. By this point in time, Uzume was not the only Sekirei to have exited said woman's room. Musubi had just come out after hearing the noise. Hey, Uzume, the fist fighter started as she walked out of the bedroom. What happened? All I saw was you getting hit by some kind of blur and, oh. The girl cut herself off mid-sentence when she saw her Ashikabi and gave the blonde a beaming smile. Naruto-sama. Hello. Much as he had come to expect from Musubi, the naive girl hadn't even noticed the perverted woman closing in on her Ashikabi with less than pure intentions. The second one out was Kusano. The girl waddled out of the room right behind Musubi, her eyes taking in the scene around her. She seemed confused by what was going on, her young mind obviously not able to understand or read the situation. At least she had the excuse of being young, Musubi was just that scatter-brained. Her eyes did light up when she saw Naruto standing there, eyeing the redhead cautiously. Oni-chan. She began waddling her way towards the blonde in excitement, somehow managing to grab hold and cling to his leg even though he was constantly taking a step back for each step Matsu took forward. Not now, Ku-chan, Naruto mumbled almost to himself, still staring at the pervert in front of him warily, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. Oni-chan's busy at the moment. The little girl did not seem to take kindly to that statement if her puffed-up cheeks were any indication. She glared up at Naruto, her little arms still wrapped around his left leg, as she released a "foog" noise from the back of her throat. Not that Naruto was actually paying attention, busy as he was trying to figure a way out of this situation. It was only when Akatsu came out, her face just as expressionless as it always was, that Naruto's mind was able to come up with an appropriate plan to get himself out of this situation. Akatsu! Naruto shouted, gaining the snow woman's attention. Restrain that woman. He pointed over to Matsu, who blinked several times at the sudden change that had come over the blonde. Yes, master, Akatsu said immediately, no sign whatsoever of the usual hesitation that was often found in her voice. The air around her began to fog over, the temperature in the hallway dropped several degrees. Just as suddenly as the fog came, Matsu found her hands and feet shackled with a set of icy bonds. Matsu blinked as she looked down at herself. With her legs now bound together she found herself beginning to topple, and with her arms similarly shackled she was unable to regain her balance. Thus, with a loud squawk of surprise, Matsu fell onto her side on the wooden floor. She wiggled around, attempting to either find some means of escape, or simply some kind of natural reactions, perhaps a combination of the two. Thanks, Akatsu-chan, Naruto said as he let himself finally relax. Was it just him, or had this entire 1-minute runaround of trying not to let this Sekirei rape his lips been more tiring than his fight with Yomi? Akatsu blushed at being acknowledged by her Ashikabi. She looked down at her toes demurely, her hair overshadowing her eyes, leaving only the light pink that stained her cheeks. You're welcome, she said quietly. All right, Uzume began, placing her hands on her hips as she tried to make sense of this situation. Just what is going on here? Why is Matsu out of her room? She asked, and from the way Musubi and Kusano were looking at the scene in confusion, they likely wanted some kind of explanation as well, though they would need to have considerably more explained to them if they wanted to understand anything. What's a Matsu? Asked Musubi, proving Naruto's previous thoughts with just that one question. She was pressing her right index finger to her lips as she looked around at everybody curiously. Is that like discretion? If so, I think I'm getting the hang of that now. Uzume and Naruto looked at the girl with almost identical blank expressions. Akatsu didn't even seem to notice, busy as she was looking at Naruto with a blush staining her features. And Kusano was just nodding her head with what her older Sekirei sister was saying. Naruto sighed as he felt a headache beginning to form. He was getting a lot more of those nowadays. Headaches, that is. Matsu isn't a thing, Musubi-chan, he said tiredly. Matsu is a Sekirei. And the Sekirei with the name Matsu is the girl currently tied up on the floor by Akatsu-chan's eyes. Musubi blinked, then looked over to where Naruto was pointing and stared at the red head that was still wiggling around on her back in surprise. Oh. Musubi smashed a fist into the palm of her open hand. I get it now. So that's Matsu. She looked at the woman again and tilted her head in confusion. Hey, why is she tied up on the floor anyways? She asked, and Naruto almost groaned at how oblivious the girl truly was. Was he really like this when he was kid? Was this why everyone got so annoyed with him when he asked questions? He really hoped not. She's on the ground because she tried to assault my virgin lips, Naruto stated, gaining a weird look from Uzume, and a confused one from Musubi and Kusano, both of whom obviously didn't understand that statement. Akatsu just looked the same as always. Your virgin lips, Uzume stated incredulously. I've heard some weird things in my life, but that just takes the cake. There is nothing virgin about your lips, the conviction in her voice as she said that had Naruto pouting. Sure, he might have kissed tens of thousands of girls in his life, and yes, his lips and tongue might have done more things to most women than anyone else would ever be capable of, but that didn't mean this perverted red hadn't been about to steal his chastity. It wasn't about semantics or technicalities anyways, it was about Matsu trying to assault his lips with her own, and possibly assaulting even more than that. You don't need to say it so bluntly, Naruto muttered under his breath. Hey, Uzume smiled at the blonde. Don't worry, there's nothing bad about not having virgin lips, as you call them, she said, making quotations in the air. If anything you should be proud, your Sekirei seemed to enjoy those lips of yours quite thoroughly. Her words seemed to provoke a response from his own Sekirei. Oh, do I ever? Musubi shouted, her excitement practically visible as a physical manifestation as she pumped a single fist into the air. I love Naruto-sama's lips. They're so warm, and soft, and moist, and they make me feel so good. Her last few words, along with the way she seemed to almost innocently moan them out, a paradox that only Musubi seemed capable of doing, caused the blonde to blush rather heavily at the insinuation. The worst part about what Musubi said was that she had no clue as to just how many ways her statement could be taken. Hey. Uzume seemed to have a few thoughts on that though, if her laugh was any indication. Phew. And so did Matsu, though that did not surprise Naruto in the slightest considering just what she had tried to do to him. Akatsu seemed to snap out of her glazed-over state at those words and came back from her happy place. She looked over at Naruto, and once more blushed, this time to the roots of her hair. Yes, she nodded in agreement with Musubi's words, and then went back to her happy place again. Her reaction only seemed to spark more chuckles from Uzume, and another round of perverted giggling from Matsu. Can we please get back to the matter at hand? Asked Naruto, running a tired hand through his hair as he tried to bring everyone's focus back towards the fact that a red-haired Sekirei had just tried to rape him. It unfortunately wasn't to be, however, when the angry sounds coming from his little Sekirei brought all attention to her. She was glaring up at Naruto with puffed-up cheeks and a red face. Really, Naruto didn't think he had ever seen her look so angry, or angry at all for that matter. It was kind of disturbing if he were honest with himself. Ku-chan. Naruto started uncertainly, only to let out a loud yelp of surprise and pain as the little girl sunk her teeth into his thigh. Ouch. Damn it, Ku, why are you biting me? The blonde shouted as he tried to wiggle the girl off. He didn't want to use too much force because he might end up hurting her, but that didn't stop him from at least trying to wriggle himself free from her grasp. In response to both the blonde's actions and words, the vicious little animal that had once been a cute girl began to chomp down on his flesh like it was a chicken leg. Ack. For God's sakes, Ku, stop biting me. Fupid Omi-han. Kusano growled, her voice muffled due to her still having a chunk of Naruto's leg in her mouth. Fu-chan answer fisses too. It took him a moment to figure out just what she had said due to how muffled her words were, but when he did the blonde grimaced. Ku-chan, I can't kiss you right now, he tried to say placatingly. From the growl he received it didn't take a genius to figure out that it might have been a better idea for him to have stayed silent. Still, he tried to at least explain his reasoning in the hopes that the little sprite would at least understand. He should have known that children didn't like reason and logic. You're just too young for that kind of thing. Perhaps when you get a little older. Nay, OWCH. By the sage that hurt. Kusano, you need to Santo, oh god. Are those your molars digging into me? The searing pain as Kusano apparently decided to use more extreme methods of torture on the blonde, combined with his constant unsuccessful attempts at getting the girl off, caused the eternal shinobi to lose his balance completely. He fell to the ground with a loud thud, falling on his back as the green girl that Naruto was no longer sure could be called a girl continued digging her molars into his thyroid. Ah! Naruto-sama. Musubi yelled out in surprise as she saw the blonde fall. Are you okay? She asked in worry as she rushed over towards her ashikabi and the vicious creature known as Kusano continued to chomp away at his leg. Okay. Okay. Naruto shouted more in pain than in anger, though Musubi still flinched. I've got a brat chewing on me like I'm some kind of chew toy. As if in response to his comment, Kusano's biting began to sink even deeper into his skin, causing Naruto to cry out. By the mother of the Sage of Six Paths. Get her off me. Just calm down, Naruto-sama. Musubi cried, looking panicked as she flailed her arms around. By this point in time, Akatsu had come up and was looking at the scene as she tried to determine the best way to remove Kusano without injuring either of them. I'll get her off in just a second. Ku-chan, you have to get off Naruto-sama now. You don't want to hurt him any more than you already have, do you? Akatsu started in an attempt to help her ashikabi with his current predicament. Bad Ku. Stop biting. Naruto wasn't even sure if he should give points to the ice user for trying. If anything, the pair's words only seemed to increase the little sprite's ire, and Naruto once more cried out in pain as Kusano's molars sank into his leg. Hey, this is the most entertainment I've ever had, Uzume said as she stood beside a still tied up Matsu with a large grin on her face. She was obviously taking great enjoyment of the blonde's pain, and seemed to be in no hurry to help him. I can't wait to tell my ashikabi about this, they're going to flip when they hear it. What do you think, Matsu? Uzume trailed off and blinked when she realized that the woman she had been talking to was no longer there. How had she not noticed a woman tied up by icy bonds leave? How had she even managed to leave? Where did she go? Looking around, the Sekirei wearing the star shirt found Matsu just a few feet away from her previous position. Sometime during their one-sided conversation, the redhead had managed flip over onto her stomach, chest, and was now doing her best impression of an inchworm as she slowly crept across the floor, drooling and giggling madly. Yes. Now that he's immobile I can finally have him. Just wait, soon I will be able to experiment on you all I want. Phew hoo 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 hoo. Uzume promptly felt a sweat drop form on her head. Maybe this situation is beginning to get a little out of hand, she said to herself. Perhaps I should help Naruto out, he's a good guy after all. She thought about it for a moment, but then shrugged the thoughts away and smiled. Nah, this is just too entertaining to stop now. Era. What's too entertaining to stop, Uzume-san? Asked an oh-so-sweet voice from behind her. Uzume froze, her eyes going wide and fear permeating her body. Slowly, she turned her head to see the source of that voice standing just not even an inch behind her. Mia was smiling the same as always, her eyes crinkled as she took in the scene before them. Uzume was just thankful the woman had apparently decided not to unleash her Hania mask yet. Oh my, the Lavenderette said, holding a hand to her cheek as she continued watching the scene of chaos before her. Everyone is certainly quite lively up here, aren't they? She asked, and Uzume snorted as she decided to ignore her previous freakout and turned back to the scene. It seemed that Mia had decided to take what enjoyment she could out of Naruto's suffering as well. That's one way to put it, she replied to Mia's words as she looked at the scene, her smile returning. Naruto was still crying out in pain and screaming for his Sekirei to help him get the little girl off him. Musubi was freaking out, and Akatsu was just standing there staring at the scene in confusion as she tried to figure out what to do. No. Why is this so hard? Matsu was still inching her way towards Naruto like some kind of worm. Must get winged. I need his babies. I wonder. Uzume said as she put a finger to her chin. How long do you think it will take for them to even realize you're here? She asked Mia. Mia blinked, taking her hand off her cheek and adopting a confused expression. I'm not sure. Do you think I should get their attention? No, Uzume shook her head, giggling when Musubi ended up falling on top of Naruto, her breast smashing into his face. No, you shouldn't. XOX. I'm really sorry about causing so much trouble, Matsu said, rubbing her head sheepishly as she did so. Please allow me to reintroduce myself. I am Sekirei number 02, Matsu. Pleased to meet you all. The redhead bowed towards everyone as was customary in Japan, though since they were all sitting around the table all she could do was bow her head. The pleasure's all mine, Naruto replied somewhat dryly. Absently looking to his left, Naruto made sure that Akatsu was sitting next to him in case the woman tried to jump him again since she had proven to be the only one capable of restraining another Sekirei so far, even if she had been just as useless as Musubi when it came to getting Kusano off of him. Speaking of, the blonde looked over to where Kusano was sitting on the other side of Musubi, who was sitting on his right. The little girl seemed to be giving him the cold shoulder, still quite upset at hearing that his other Sekirei had gotten to kiss her Oni-chan and she had not. He sighed, that was a situation he didn't even want to think about. Naruto could only hope Kusano got over it eventually, because there was no way he would be swapping spit with her anytime soon. It seems nothing is ever boring when Uzumaki-kun is around, Mia said with a gentle smile that hid her amusement. Naruto sighed, already sensing the amount of teasing this most recent debacle would get him. Really, it wasn't his fault that the perverted redhead couldn't keep her hands to herself and tried to rape him. He had done what anyone else would have done in that situation. Who the hell was he kidding? No other red-hot-blooded male would have run from a hot woman wanting to have sex with them. He wouldn't have run from a hot woman wanting to have sex with him. At least, not in most circumstances. Unfortunately, this situation was not most circumstances, and went far above and beyond what most people would call a normal situation. I would just like to say that none of this was my fault, he stated, his tone tired. Not your fault? Asked Uzume, her voice a mixture between incredulous and amused. How is this whole situation not your fault? I didn't ask her to chase me, you know, Naruto groaned. Matsu looked like she wanted to rape me. I had to get out of there. What else was I supposed to do? Matsu huffed to herself. Maybe you should have just let me rape you, she muttered quietly. What was that, Matsu? Asked Mia, her beautiful smile turning to the redhead. Matsu froze. Nothing, Mia. The redhead squeaked in fear as the aura of malicious anger and hate appeared behind the Lavenderette. Gulping, Matsu was quick to point out something that Mia, in her need to stamp out all things illicit and forbidden, had forgotten about. Naruto's still in the room. She shouted, causing Mia to look over at where said blonde was leaning on the table in preparation to see her Hania mask once again. Realizing that the only male in the room was once more trying to steal her technique, Mia cut off whatever power she was using to call it. The feeling of despair disappeared, along with the mask that had just started creeping out from behind her. The woman in question huffed in frustration, no doubt annoyed that her favored weapon to wage war against all things forbidden in Maison Izumo had been taken away from her. Matsu and the rest of the room sans Naruto just sighed in relief. Anyways, the landlady continued after taking a moment to regain her previous gently demeanor. Her gentle smile returned as she looked at the secret tenant of Maison Izumo. I hope you have calmed down now, Matsu-san, she said, making Matsu puff out her cheeks and turn her head in annoyance, though from the pink tinge on her cheeks, she was more embarrassed than annoyed. I said I was sorry, the redhead pouted, looking for all the world like a petulant child that had just had their favorite toy taken away. That wasn't even how I wanted to introduce myself to Naruto-tan, she muttered, using the childish mispronunciation of the diminutive, chan, suffix when referring to Naruto. She seemed to be truly disappointed in herself, and Naruto couldn't help but wonder just how she had originally planned on meeting him. A moment later he decided he wouldn't tempt fate any longer when she said, my original plan was to wait until everyone had left the house, or were at least on opposite sides of the house when Naruto finally took a bath, and then pounce. The girl didn't even seem to realize she had spoken out loud until her eyes widened and her hands slapped themselves over her mouth. Oh my, Mia muttered in obvious disapproval. You do know that illicit relations within Maison Izumo are strictly forbidden. The frown on the Lavenderette's face and she soon smiled. Why, if you actually did do something like that then I would have no choice but to cast you out on the street, she said, and it seemed to Naruto that with her being incapable of using her Hania mask thanks to him, she had turned towards blackmail in order to get what she wanted. Though Naruto why such a threat had enough to actually convince the perverted Sekirei to stop her untoward advances. No! Matsu cried out as she flung herself on the ground in front of Mia, her figure prostrated in a bow with her nose touching the floor as if she were in the presence of her lord. Naruto had to raise an eyebrow at how frantic the girl sounded. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Please don't kick me out, Mia. I promise I won't do it again. I'll be good from now on, I promise. How can I trust that what you say is true? Asked Mia, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. Naruto had to admit the woman was a great actor, even he was having trouble telling if she was lying or not. However, the blonde was sure that the landlady was fibbing in order to get Matsu's cooperation. After all, she had gone through all the trouble of hiding the redhead's presence, even from him and his Sekirei. Surely after going through so much trouble to keep the woman a secret, she wouldn't just kick her out. Matsu didn't seem to think that way as she frantically and repeating bowed low and mumbled out apologies and promises to the woman who owned Maison Izumo. I give you my word, the redhead was saying. Just please don't kick me out, I beg of you. Era, Mia began, waving off Matsu's concerns with a gentle smile. With her intimidation and blackmailing tactics done, she returned to be nothing more than a beautiful yet unassuming landlady. Very well, though I do expect you to uphold that promise in the future. As Matsu's head began to bob up and down frantically, the sword-wielding widow turned to look at Naruto. Now then, perhaps Uzumaki-kun would care to explain just how it is he managed to find out where Matsu-san lives, she said. It wasn't a question. Naruto swore as he realized that his impromptu tracking and interrogation might not have been the best idea. It was another rookie mistake, he realized. He had been so caught up in figuring just why someone was hiding in Maison Izumo that he had forgotten to plan out what would happen afterwards. Even if the situation had turned out differently, and Naruto had gotten all of the information out of Matsu that he wanted, Mia and the others still would have found out and he still would have been questioned. And worse still, this had been the exact situation he had been hoping to avoid by confronting Matsu now. Was he really losing his touch so badly that he was willing to take such impulsive actions? Obviously his actions spoke for themselves. What he had done was both stupid and lacked proper forethought. He was supposed to be better than this. Naruto might not have had Shikamaru's genius for strategies, but during the war he had trained himself with the shadow user extensively in strategy and tactics. Before he died, Shikamaru had taught him everything he could on anticipating the movements of your opponents and thinking about everything 50 moves in advance. It had, in fact, been Naruto learning strategy from the best that kept the Shinobi Alliance from losing outright after Shikamaru's death. Maybe this was what happened when you went thousands of years without true conflict. Not since the Fourth Great Shinobi War had Naruto been in any kind of battle where he needed to worry about strategy. The only thing in his life that had required constant cunning and forethought was keeping himself hidden from the world, and that had been easy to learn about doing because he had been there during the invention of the computer. He had watched as the internet became accessible to every home with a computer and not just the military, had seen when the first satellite had been launched into the air, and had studied everything he would need to keep his identity and existence a secret. He'd had several decades to properly plan out all of his moves, learn about all these new innovations and technologies, and gather the necessary information he would need to blackmail the most powerful figures in the world. It hadn't been easy, but with the amount of time he had, and his own intelligence, it had been perfectly doable. This recent problem with Sekirei and the Sekirei plan was nothing like that. Naruto hadn't even had the time to properly think of what this situation meant for him, much less learn the ins and outs of the plan itself. This event had been sprung on him just 9 days ago, and the blonde was still trying to regain his balance from the dramatic shift in his life. Fortunately, while Naruto may have rusted when it came to long-term strategy, he was more than capable of speaking with a silver tongue. He had been using political backspeak for decades now, and could easily deflect and/or redirect a conversation to where he wanted it to go. Thinking fast, the blonde said, "It wasn't that hard," with a small shrug of his shoulders. After Ku-chan mentioned the ghost, and the reaction you two gave me, he pointed to Mia and Uzume. I assumed that there was someone else living in this house that you were determined to hide for some reason. After that, well, it didn't take very long to realize just why the second floor doesn't have a room 201. I think the real question, he continued, giving both Uzume and Mia an accusing stare, is why you two felt the need to hide the fact that there was another tenant hiding away at Maison Izumo. I hope you both realize that all of this could have been avoided if you had just come out and said there was someone hiding with us and that she didn't like to be bothered. Uzume grimaced, and even Mia seemed to look contrite and chastised by his words. Now that the tables had been turned, Naruto did not hesitate in pressing his advantage. Well? He asked, leaning on his right forearm which he had set upon the table, and tapping a steady beat with his index finger. I do apologize for not notifying you that there was someone else living within Maison Izumo, Uzumaki-kun, Mia began slowly. However, we all have our secrets, as you well know. Naruto managed to withhold a grimace as he recognized the subtle jab at his own hesitance to reveal his past. He knew that everyone was curious about him, and Mia was even more so. He also knew that the landlady had not truly asked him anything incriminating due to her respect for his privacy. I do understand that, he began. And I'm not saying you're wrong either. I am merely pointing out that this could have been avoided if you had just told us about someone else living here when Kusano first mentioned seeing a ghost. At the word ghost, Kusano seemed to gain a shiver that ran up her body and down her spine. Naruto ignored her for the moment, his sole attention fixated on the purple-haired landlady. Yes, Mia could not withhold her grimace. I suppose you are correct. My apologies, Naruto-san, she said, using both his first name and the more formal, san, suffix to apologize. Both Matsu and Uzume looked between the two in surprise, though whether it was because of Mia apologizing or something else entirely Naruto couldn't say for sure. It's fine, Naruto sighed, closing his eyes as a wave of exhaustion hit him. What he wouldn't give for at least one day without being surrounded by so much chaos. I guess, I can understand why you didn't tell me. And he did, there were only a few reasons they could be hiding someone, especially if that person was a Sekirei. None of them were very pleasant. I am sorry as well, I was out of line just now. He bowed his head towards Mia, please accept my most humble apology. Accepted, Mia said in the same formal tone Naruto used, though her words were laced lightly with surprise. Perhaps she had not been expecting him to be so accepting of her answer, or maybe she had not expected him to apologize. Not that Naruto cared about the reasons she was surprised, or that she even was surprised in the first place. Honestly, he was too tired to deal with this now. For some reason, this whole fiasco had left him exhausted, and right now all he wanted to do was sleep. What I want to know is why Matsu reacted so badly to bro here, Uzume stated, most likely in an attempt to change the subject. She eyed Naruto curiously as if he were some puzzle to be studied. I mean, he literally needed to have Akatsu restrain her, and even then she still tried to get him. Over where she sat, Matsu blushed at the other Sekirei's words. I am really sorry about what happened, Naruto-tan, she said, sounding contrite. Naruto noticed that she really did seem to be angry and embarrassed at herself for reacting so poorly. I had known I was reacting for a while now, she admitted, her eyes darting over to Naruto and her blush increasing. The blonde in question couldn't help but wonder if it was due to her embarrassment or her reacting to him. She stuck her tongue out and wetted her lips before continuing. But I had been hoping to study Naruto-tan for a little while longer before confronting him. I honestly don't know what came over me. She looked down at her hands on the table, her face gaining a contemplative expression. When Naruto-tan first came into the room, my entire body felt like it was on fire, just reminding myself to breathe was difficult. She looked back up and stared at a now uncomfortable Naruto. And when you started talking to me I just lost it. I knew right then and there that I had to have you. Naruto was at a loss for words. Not due to embarrassment at Matsu's own words, at least, not completely, but at the fact that he seemed to have caused such a strong reaction in the girl. Truth be told, the moment he had entered the room, he had noticed his own body responding. He had ignored it at the time, having wanted answers and been in no mood to even think about his own arousal. A part of the reason he had run from the girl was not just because of what she had tried doing to him, but also because of what he probably would have done to her if he had allowed them to kiss. Even now, Naruto could feel himself responding to her. It was the whole reason he was currently using a combination of water and wind chakra to create an effect similar to a cold shower over key parts of his body even as the conversation continued taking place. It's all right, he stuttered out at last. Taking a deep breath, Naruto felt ready to continue. You wouldn't be the first Sekirei to have reacted so strongly to me. Really? Asked Matsu, seeming to perk up at hearing that she wasn't the only one who had reacted like that to the blonde. Naruto hummed in agreement. When Musubi began reacting to me, her body had nearly shut down from overheating. She could hardly even move at the time. Matsu looked extremely interested in hearing about this particular news, and the blonde was almost positive it was not just because it meant she wasn't the only one to have such an overreacting reaction to him. Though just why Matsu found that interesting Naruto didn't know. What about Akatsu-tan? Asked Matsu, eyeing Musubi and then the ice user. Akatsu didn't react to me at all, Naruto admitted. When several eyes narrowed, the blonde held up his hands. I think it's because there was something blocking her ability to be winged. That guy who worked for Higa called her a scrapped number. He frowned upon remembering those words. He still didn't know what a scrapped number was, though he was sure Akatsu's blocked ability to be winged had something to do with her being a scrapped number. That would make sense, Matsu said while nodding. She adjusted her glasses, which seemed to gleam in the reflected light of the sun. Thankfully, this gleam seemed more like the kind a researcher would have when there was a mystery to be solved, and not that of the perverted hentai who wanted to get into his pants. After all, as a scrapped number, Akatsu-tan wasn't supposed to even be capable of having an ashikabi. She turned her eyes on Naruto, this time studying him with some other than perverted or embarrassed glances. That's why Naruto-tan gained his nickname as the Miracle Worker. Naruto frowned, but ignored the title for now. So just what is a scrapped number? He asked, his eyes narrowing. Beside him the clinking of Akatsu's chains could be heard as the woman shifted in her seat. I still haven't even been told why what I did was so unusual. And he meant aside from the fact that he had been forced to use his chakra in order to break what was blocking her. He doubted anyone here even knew about that. While they could use chakra of some sort, there were no other natural humans besides himself who could now actively channel chakra. And he had done his best to keep that mostly a secret. Musubi might know of his cloning technique, and Akatsu knew he could gather nature, but he had never told them about chakra and all of its uses. A scrapped number is a Sekirei who can't be winged, Matsu answered immediately, before glancing over at Akatsu and amending her statement. Or at least, they are no supposed to be capable of being winged. Supposedly, a scrapped number is a Sekirei who was winged preternaturally, meaning they were winged during the adjusting process without the mucosal contact needed to gain their wings by an ashikabi, but the truth is no one really knows what a scrapped number is, the redhead admitted. Naruto closed his eyes as he took in this knowledge and began piecing together what he had learned in his mind. If a Sekirei was winged during the adjusting process, then it meant they would be unable to gain an ashikabi. This was a twofold problem for the Sekirei in question as far as he could see. For one thing, they would be unable to find their ashikabi, a problem in and of itself due to the fact that an ashikabi was more than just a partner for battle, but were also in many ways like a wife or husband, perhaps even more than that. On a more logical and cold level, if a Sekirei could no longer have an ashikabi, then it meant they would be unable to unleash their full power, their Norito that Naruto had been told about. Thinking of things from both perspectives, it made sense that Akatsu would claim she was broken. Not only would she not be able to find her mate and gain her wings, but she would be unable to unleash her full power. But that brought up another question. If Akatsu's problem had, in fact, been that one of the adjusters at MBI made a mistake and she had somehow gained her wings without an ashikabi, then it meant that even Naruto should not have been able to wing her. Unless of course Naruto's own chakra had healed whatever damage had been done to her during the adjusting process. That was quite possible as well. His own chakra was unnaturally potent and had powerful regenerative properties. It was perfectly possible that when Naruto had forcefully pushed his chakra into her body that the chakra itself had healed all of the damage she had suffered. That in itself was a surprise, however, since while Naruto's chakra was not deadly in any way, he had thought its healing properties had been restricted to just being useful to him. After all, he had tried healing another person once with his chakra and gotten disastrous results. But then, that person had not been able to use chakra, so maybe that had been the reason he couldn't heal her, but could heal Akatsu. In which case, his previous theory was correct. Still, even if his theory was sound, that left a lot of unanswered questions. The only person who may know what a scrapped number is are the lead adjusters who knew more about Sekireis than everyone else. Matsu's voice brought Naruto back towards the present. Focusing on the red head, he listened as she spoke. She looked nervous. And, well, she spared a glance towards Mia, something that Naruto noticed immediately. It only lasted for a second before her eyes turned back towards the blonde. One of the leading adjusters is no longer among the living, Mia answered when Matsu trailed off. Naruto turned his attention to Mia, who had a sad smile on her face. My husband, Takehito, was the lead geneticist in charge of the Sekirei plan. That's how Matsu and myself first met. Her words had caused Naruto to study the woman more carefully. The way she had spoken carefully removed any and all mentions of her own power. He was sure that Mia was a Sekirei. The power she had was on a scale that went far beyond anything he had felt in thousands of years. There was no way she wasn't a Sekirei. At the same time, it was equally clear that she did not want him to know about her status as a Sekirei, a surprise considering he had already told her that he knew she was not a normal landlady. Granted, he had not outright said, I know you're a Sekirei, but the intention had been there. It had been his peace offering, a way of letting Mia know that he knew she wasn't normal and that he meant no harm. So either she knew that he knew and was just playing her games, completely possible from what Naruto had seen so far. Or she didn't know and was still trying to keep up the facade. Not as likely as far as Naruto was concerned. It had to be the first theory. I see, Naruto hummed, bowing his head in Mia's direction as both acknowledgement and apology. I suppose that would make sense. After all, if your husband worked for MBI as the lead geneticist for the Sekirei plan, then it would explain why you have Matsu and Uzume living here. And Kagari, though he was still keeping that he knew of Kagari's secret a secret. His eyes narrowed, however, when he recalled what the woman had done he had first brought in Kusano. If you knew about the Sekirei plan from the very start, then that meant you also knew that Kusano was a Sekirei when I first brought her here after we had rescued her from the Arboretum. Kusano stiffened at his words, and buried herself in Musubi's ample chest. Oh my, Mia smiled as she held a hand to her cheek. I do apologize for that, but you can't expect me to recognize a Sekirei on sight, can you? She asked, causing Naruto to narrow his eyes. So she wanted to play at that game, did she? That was fine with Naruto. He was an old hand at this game, and Mia was several thousand years too soon to beat him. Yeah, I suppose you're right. He relented and adopted a thoughtful pose, his right hand holding up his left arm at the elbow as his left hand began tapping his chin in an absent beat. I mean, just because your husband was the leading geneticist at MBI doesn't mean you would be capable of spotting a Sekirei on sight. I mean, you are just a normal landlady after all. He gave the woman an innocent smile that hid his pleasure when he saw Mia stiffen at his words. Right. Of course, Uzumaki-kun, Mia said with a smile of her own. You can't expect a poor widower like me to know what my husband is working on. And yet, you know about the Sekirei plan, Naruto countered. Just because my husband told me about some of the things he was working on, doesn't mean he tells me everything, Mia replied with a blindingly bright smile. That's very true, Naruto said, before sighing. I suppose I just imagined you looking at the back of Kusano's neck the moment we had entered the house. When Mia sat up straighter, Naruto smiled. If subtle doesn't work, it was best to go with a sledgehammer blow. Just a little more pushing and he would have won this battle. That was before you had pointed your sword at me, by the way. Matsu and Uzume stared incredulously as they saw Mia at a loss for words. They probably weren't used to the normally powerful-looking woman so indecisive before now. Quickly coughing into her hand, Mia recovered her decor, though Naruto knew he had already won. You must have been imagining it, she said, and with that, the blonde confirmed his victory. I take what I said before back, Uzume whispered as she watched the finish between Naruto's and Mia's banter. Baseballs are nowhere near big enough. Basketballs, that's the only thing they could be. Giant, steel basketballs. Naruto gave Uzume a mild glare, but decided not to say anything in order to bring the previous conversation back into focus. When you seemed surprised when I informed you that Musubi reacted in a similar way to me that you did, he said to Matsu, an obvious question in his voice. Just in case she did not know what he was asking, the blonde decided to elaborate. Is such a reaction unusual for Sekirei? Matsu nodded as she grabbed the sides of her glasses and adjusted them. Yes, she told him. In fact, it's more than unusual. When a Sekirei reacts, it's natural for them to feel a bit of heat, and maybe be short of breath. I know that before truly coming into your presence, I felt hot and my heart tended to race a little bit whenever I looked at you. You mean whenever you peeped on me? Naruto deadpanned, causing the redhead to laugh sheepishly. Just how many cameras do you have set up at Maison Izumo anyways? He asked. Matsu has cameras set up everywhere. Phew. Matsu exclaimed with what Naruto had decided to call her perverted old man giggle. He narrowed his eyes. If you have them everywhere, that means you also have a camera in the bathhouse, he stated. Matsu began to nod her head eagerly, at least she did until the cold feeling of malice began leaking from Mia. Matsu-san, the woman began. You do realize that peeping on people while they are bathing is a very illicit action, and illicit actions are forbidden within Maison Izumo. There it was again, creeping out from behind the lithe and beautiful woman that was currently releasing unimaginable levels of hatred and malice. Naruto had not seen it since last night, but he would recognize that Hania mask anywhere. Beside him, Akatsu had turned her head away, the small cup of tea in front of her freezing over. Musubi had taken to clinging to Naruto while Kusano was clinging to Musubi. I do hope you plan on taking those things down, Mia smiled. Otherwise, I may have to kick you out. Eek. I'm sorry. I'll take them down right away. Matsu wailed at the sight, bowing her entire body repeatedly. Just please keep that thing away from me. When that didn't seem to work, she used what was becoming the tried and true method for getting rid of the Hania mask. Naruto-tan's still in the room. Indeed, she was right. Naruto was not only in the room, but had somehow moved directly next to the Hania mask, replacing himself with Akatsu at the same time, all without Mia even noticing. The mask disappeared in an instant, causing Naruto to narrow his eyes at the woman. His challenging look was returned by Mia, and sparks soon began flying between them as the two fought in a war that only they knew of. One in which both were determined to be the winner. Dear God, Uzume whispered as she watched Naruto staring down the fearsome landlady. Just when I think they can't get any bigger. She shook her head. Beach balls made of steel. No, steel isn't strong enough. Titanium beach balls. That's what they are. Large, titanium beach balls. Do you have to be so crass, Uzume? Asked Naruto, sighing as he decided there were more important things to worry about than Mia's awesome technique. For now at least. Hey, Uzume grinned and winked at the blonde. At least I didn't mention what beach balls I was talking about. Naruto just sighed for what seemed to be the umpteenth time as he sat back in his seat next to Akatsu. His own Sekirei must be gaining an immunity to the mask by now, because they had already recovered from the sight of it. Before the blonde could say anything further to berate Uzume, Matsu decided to make a change of subject. If Musubi-tan's and my own reaction are anything to go by, then Naruto-tan must be a very strong ashikabi, she said, her eyes looking at the person in question before turning to Akatsu still sitting at his side. Considering he even managed to wing someone who wasn't supposed to gain her wings, I don't think I can say I'm very surprised by this. She then turned her attention back to Naruto and looked at him with a surprisingly demure expression. If we're done talking, can I please get my wings now? She asked. URK. Oh wow, you've got another Sekirei. Isn't that great, Naruto-sama? Musubi cheered, seemingly thrilled by the thought of her ashikabi adding another member to his harem. And this one's a single digit too. Yes, his first Sekirei was quite overjoyed. Hey, Uzume chuckled as she gave the blonde a probing look. Wow, it's pretty impressive to see you adding another one to your harem. Most ashikabis ever get one Sekirei to react. Thanks, I guess, Naruto replied tiredly. While Musubi might be excited by the thought of him gaining another Sekirei to add to his harem, the blonde was most definitely not excited. He had enough trouble as it was dealing with the emotions of 3 Sekirei and his own budding feelings. How much more difficult would that become if he bonded to a 4th Sekirei? Would he even be able to recognize his own thoughts and feelings? How would he know if what he felt wasn't coming from one of his Sekirei? How much would he be able to take before losing himself to the bond? It wasn't something he liked to think about, but Naruto often held such thoughts these days, wondering how long it would be before his own personality was subsumed by his Sekireis. There was also the fact that Naruto didn't want another Sekirei. If he allowed another female to bond with him, if he let this new girl into his heart like that, it would only be setting himself up for more heartbreak down the road. Already the thought of losing the 3 girls he had bonded to, the knowledge that they would eventually leave him was like having one of Akatsu's ice spears being thrust into his chest. It hurt, he didn't want to admit it, but the knowledge that they would eventually die was painful. It also wasn't fair to the Sekirei. Naruto had already determined that the bond between Ashikabi and Sekirei was almost like some form of matrimony, only 10,000 times more powerful. With a Sekirei, it really would be till death do us part. There was no going back, no second chances, no do-overs. When a Sekirei bonded themselves, that was it, they couldn't bond to another. Being bonded to someone like him was unfair to the Sekirei. After all, when they were all old and wrinkly and unable to shit without help, he would still look like a barely 18-year-old male. How would they feel when they were forced to see him day in and day out for the rest of their lives, young and ageless, while they withered away? He already felt incredibly guilty about doing this to Akatsu, Musubi, and Kusano. Was it really right for him to force another to experience this kind of hardship? But, don't you all think I have enough Sekirei? Asked Naruto, getting Uzume and Musubi to stop cheering and look at him in shock. Matsu also looked like she was in a state of shock, though hers seemed to be more of a form of dismay than anything else. Mia on the other hand had opened her eyes and was now studying Naruto intently. The only people who had not reacted to his words were Akatsu, who was still staring at him, and Kusano, who just didn't understand what was going on. No. Matsu was the first one to react, shouting at him as she quite literally hurled herself across the table. Equally fast, Naruto was already reacting. He rolled backwards, kipping up to his feet as he flicked his left hand at the red head. A long strand of steel wire was launched out of his sleeves. Another flick and Naruto had the wire weaving itself around Matsu. A pull followed, and the red-haired Sekirei found herself falling the floor with a grunt as her arms and legs became completely wrapped in steel. Naruto was glad he had the forethought to grab his ninja wire from his room before coming downstairs for this conversation. Yet even though she was hogtied and unable to do much more than wiggle, she still struggled. Please don't reject me. She looked up at him with pleading eyes. Please, you're my Ashikabi. I want you. I need you. Naruto grimaced, his body lurching as it reacted to her words. He fought with his own feelings, however, knowing that this was the right thing to do. He didn't want to hurt any more than he already would, and he didn't want to hurt anybody else when they realized he was cursed. This was the right thing to do, it was. It had to be. How could you even think of not winging her, Naruto-sama? Musubi seemed to be in a combination state of shock and denial. The look only lasted for a moment before she slammed her hands onto the table and glared at him. We talked about this. She's reacting to you. You two are connected. She loves you. How can you not return that love? It's not that simple, Naruto whispered, shaking his head at her. He didn't blame Musubi for being angry at him, she didn't understand. How could she? Aside from being raised in a lab, she didn't know of the life he had lived, of the hardships he had faced, or the realizations he had come to. Hers were the eyes of innocence, unjaded from seeing the truth of the world. She believed in the power of love, that so long as the love people had for each other existed, they could triumph over anything. She didn't understand that could only take someone so far. What's so hard about it? She asked, her voice far louder than any of them had ever heard it, even when compared to the night she had gone off on Seo. She loves you, she's reacting to you. You are her Ashikabi. Naruto took a step back, his head shook back and forth as he tried to deny both her words and his own feelings on the matter. These weren't his feelings. They couldn't be. This had to be the bond. His Sekirei were the ones making him feel like this. It was denial, he knew, but at the moment denial was all he had. Naruto-san, Mia said, once again speaking to him more formally, her tone much more solemn than any of them had ever heard it. She was studying him with a critical eye now, dissecting him with her vision as if she would somehow be able to glean the truth by just looking at him. Are you sure it is a wise idea to deny a Sekirei her chance to bond with you? She asked carefully. I know you have problems, but are they really worth giving up on allowing yourself a chance to find happiness? Yes they were. His problems made happiness impossible. Any that he might find would only be a fleeting feeling, a bittersweet memory, the cause of a nightmare. Finding a few decades worth of love was not worth the heartache that would follow. He knew this, he had already experienced it before. So yes, his problems were worth giving up on finding love. That's what he wanted to say at least. He wanted to tell Mia that love was a pipe dream, a fool's errand, an impossibility. That there was no such thing as love, especially for someone like him. Yet, no matter how many times he opened his mouth, the words refused to come out. Why? Why couldn't he say it? Why couldn't he tell her what he thought? It was the truth, wasn't it? Yes, it had to be the truth. He knew this, knew it in his very bones, in the depths of his soul. So then why couldn't he say it? Why then, did he want to believe otherwise? Why did he want to believe that what Musubi thought was true? Was it the bond? Could that be it? It had to be, right? That was the only viable explanation. It couldn't be him, these couldn't be his feelings. Because if they were, then that meant he hadn't learned his lesson. And he had, hadn't he? A tug on his left pant leg directed his attention to Akatsu. The ice user started, staring up at him from where she continued to sit. It's horrible, not being able to be with your Ashikabi, she said. I wasn't supposed to even have an Ashikabi, but you saved me. What you are trying to do now is worse than what I myself had experienced when I had been told I could never gain my wings. She paused to look over at Matsu. Everyone else stared at her, this was the most they had ever heard her speak in a single moment. And it seemed she wasn't done, because a few seconds later she looked back at Naruto. You are not just not allowing Matsu-san to be winged by you are denying her the chance to be winged at all. You are her Ashikabi, the one she is destined to be with. If you do not wing her, she will never find her true Ashikabi, she will never be able to be with the one she is destined to serve. Are you really able to deny her that happiness? For a long moment, no one else said anything. Musubi and Uzume were staring at the snow woman in shock, though whether that was from her words or from the fact that she had spoken more words in a single paragraph than all of the other times she had spoken combined was unknown. Mia was studying Akatsu now, a proud smile on her face, while Kusano was nodding her head along with the ice user while humming her in agreement to the woman's words. As for Naruto, he just continued to stare at the woman in a mix of shock and guilt. Shock at the normally quiet and completely subservient Sekirei actually saying something so deep, and guilt at what her words told him. Better than anyone else, Akatsu knew what it was like to be discarded. It was just as he said, she was like Haku, and just like the ice user that had given Naruto his motto back when he was a Konoha genin, this ice user knew the same pain he did. And she was telling him that what he was doing to Matsu was even worse than what had been done to her. Hey, way to go, Akatsu, Uzume cheered, breaking the silence. She was looking at the ice user with a new gaze. Before she had probably never seen the woman as anything other than Naruto's shadow, or the former scrapped number. But now it was like she was looking at Akatsu for the first time. Akatsu-san, Musubi sniffed as she wiped several tears from her eyes. That was so beautiful. Wish I could be as eloquent as Akatsu-san. It was probably a sign of just how affected everyone was that they did not stare at Musubi in surprise at the fact that she had not only used a word like eloquent in a sentence, but used it correctly as well. Yes, Mia nodded in agreement, directing her proud smile at Akatsu. If my husband were still alive, he would have said exactly what you have. Naruto's shoulders began to slump as the weight of everyone's words sunk in. Was that what he was really doing? Was it not that he was giving Matsu a chance to be winged by someone she could love to the end of her days, but in actuality denying her the chance to find love at all? To be denied a chance at being with her Ashikabi, or heaven forbid someone who was not her Ashikabi forcibly winging her. Was he really so cruel as to allow that to happen? Had these questions been asked before Naruto had bonded to Musubi, he would have said yes. However, after 9 days of spending time with Musubi, of winging Akatsu and Kusano, of experiencing the joy he felt at learning more and more about each other, and feeling their joy in turn as they learned about him, the blonde was beginning to see things in a different light. Even if the bond truly was the cause of his new feelings and beliefs, even if what he was feeling and thinking were not his own thoughts, Naruto found that a part of him simply didn't care. He wanted to believe Musubi, wanted to believe that love was enough to triumph against anything. Even if the blonde knew otherwise, he wanted, just this once, to be proven wrong. Taking Akatsu's hand in his own, Naruto gently pried the woman's fingers from his pants. He sent her a smile and squeezed her hand, causing the ice user's pale cheeks to turn red. Letting go of her hand, Naruto had to move forward until he was standing right in front of a hopeful Matsu. She had stopped struggling some time ago, probably watching the proceedings to see what would happen and how hard she would have to struggle to get what she wanted, and was now staring at him with a look that was so hopeful Naruto felt another arrow of guilt piercing his heart. Kami, he really was a bastard, wasn't he? He had been about to deny someone their chance to bond with the one person they could truly connect to in the disguise of wanting her to bond with someone she could share a life with. It was almost a shock to him to realize just how low he had sunken, how far into the depths of his own darkness he had fallen that he would deny this girl a chance to be with him just because he was afraid of getting hurt. Sinking down to his knees, Naruto just looked at the young woman who seemed like she was about to start wiggling towards him at any moment. Is this really what you want? He asked quietly, his voice giving away nothing save for the small quiver in it. Do you really want someone like me to be your Ashikabi? I'm nothing special, just a broken man who's been wandering this world for too long. It was a slip of the tongue, one that Naruto didn't even notice. Thankfully, no one else did as well. No one else, except for Mia that is, and said woman narrowed her eyes as she began to ponder what those words could mean. Yes, Matsu breathed, her eyes searching his, beseeching as she stared at him. Yes, 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 yes. I want you to be my Ashikabi. You're the only one I want to be my Ashikabi. So please. Please make me yours. Right, Naruto's shoulders slumped just a little bit further as he made his choice. It would hurt, but he couldn't deny her this chance. If she truly wanted to be with him, then he would allow it. Even if he ended up breaking in the process. His right hand reached out towards her back where his ninja wire had managed to tie itself together. The knot itself was actually impossible to untie. It was designed that way to keep prisoners and others from using any escape jutsu to get out or wiggle themselves free. Not even Naruto could actually untie the knot, though he could certainly break it with his strength. In front of so many people he couldn't do that, so he took the subtle approach. His hand worked the knot, making it look like he was undoing it, when in truth Naruto was creating a thin blade of wind chakra that slowly cut through the steel of the wire. In less than a second, there was a loud snap. As the knot broke and the wire came undone, quickly unfurling itself from around Matsu. Mia narrowed her eyes. Matsu's eyes shone with both relief and slight perversion. Her muscles tense and she looked like she was about to pounce. Naruto put a stop to that by standing up and offering his hand. Stand up, he told her softly, looking into her dark red eyes with his blue. She looked back, confused, and so Naruto decided to elaborate by saying, if we're going to do this, then we're going to do it right. It took a moment, but Matsu's eyes lit with understanding and she hurriedly grabbed his hand and let the blonde pull her up. When she was on her feet, Matsu quickly began dusting off her dress, then turned to face Naruto. This is your last chance to back down, he warned her. She just smiled in response and quickly closed the distance between them. Her arms slid around his neck, her body pressed itself against his, her breathing picked up once more and her face began to flush as her eyes became half-lidded. Naruto could smell the heady scent of her arousal, an unusual combination that he couldn't quite place, but much like Musubi's own unique, found himself enjoying it all the same. It was comforting, an almost comforting scent. With our kiss, the redhead spoke, her warm breath hitting Naruto's lips. This number 02, Matsu, will be your Sekirei. No more words were spoken as Matsu pressed her lips to Naruto's. Already prepared for this, the eternal shinobi placed his hands on the Sekirei's hips and kissed back. Once more, Naruto felt his chakra being drained from him. Even after feeling it happen 3 times it still felt strange. Behind Matsu, her Sekirei crest emerged, and with it bright, golden wings appeared behind her back. The wings were much different from any of the other ones Naruto had seen so far. They looked more geometric in shape, the edges were crisper, sharper, hard lines and angles that could not be produced by anything organic. And then the wings dispersed, and Naruto was left only with the feel Matsu's lips against his. They were warm, moist, intoxicating. As the kiss continued, Naruto felt the woman kissing him getting bolder. Her tongue moved past his lips and tried to slip in between his teeth. Her body was starting to grind against his, her left leg was hooking itself around his own legs. Wait. What? With movements that were swift, and sure, and surprised the crap out of Naruto, Matsu used her leg to cut Naruto's out from under him. The blonde fell to the ground, hitting the hard floor with a loud, oof. As he took the red head with him. For a moment, the blonde was seeing double. Why were there 2 Matsus? Blinking, it took him a second to uncross his eyes and see that there was only one Matsu. Her face was also much clearer now, the details he had missed before now sharpened and enhanced. He did not like that look on her face. And now, Matsu started, giggling as she wiggled and squirmed against him, her glasses gleaming ominously in the light. It's time for the experimentation. Naruto blinked as his mind registered and processed the words of the woman straddling his waist. After a second of blinking, the blonde finally seemed to realize his predicament and tried to get out of it. And now Matsu, he started, beginning to back away from the perverted woman, or at least trying to. Considering she was straddling and clinging to him, his attempt didn't go so well. Don't you think we should take it slow? Phew. Matsu's perverted old man giggling sent shivers down the blonde's spine. Come on, Naruto-tan. Don't be shy now, it's time for us to get to know one another intimately as Sekirei and Ashikabi. Phew. It has nothing to do with me being shy, Naruto stated, almost pouting that she would even insinuate such a thing, even as he continued to contradict his words by squirming away. I'm just concerned about what Mia might do to you. Mia. Matsu blinked. Why would Mia do anything? Oh, I don't know, the voice of Mia came from behind Matsu, causing her to freeze. The sound of cold steel being pulled from its sheath resounded throughout the room, and the redhead gulped as Mia's blade came to rest against her neck, caressing her jugular. Perhaps it has something to do with the fact that I was almost positive that I have expressly forbidden any illicit activity within Maison Izumo. Ah, alright. Matsu laughed, not her perverted old man laughs, but a nervous laugh of fear. Why do I have this thing on my neck? I would like to ask you cease any and all illicit activity, Matsu-san, Mia told the redhead in her pleasant and beautiful voice. It was enough to put the fear of God in the heart of Matsu. Please get off Uzumaki-kun now. Ah hey. Alright, Matsu said, and then paused. Mia. Yes. The woman asked, her pleasant expression still in place. See, can you please take this thing off my neck? I'm afraid if I move around I might accidentally slit my throat. Mia blinked. It was not even 15 minutes after the entire incident with Matsu is over that Naruto found himself sitting on the veranda drinking a cup of warm tea. The tea combined with the peaceful and quiet atmosphere as the blonde sat in seiza and looked out at the expansive courtyard managed to soothe his frayed nerves. The whole experience just a few minutes prior had been one for the ages. Never in his life had Naruto felt so much conflict within himself. That is not to say he had never felt conflict before, but most of his own struggles hadn't been internal but external. Fighting the bad guys, rescuing the princess, saving the bridge builder from the evil conglomerate company, things like that. The only time Naruto had ever struggled internally was when he fought against his darker half. And he supposed Kurama could be considered an internal battle on a technicality, since the great Biju had been sealed into him. Even then his battle with his other half had not been anywhere near as conflicting as this. Maybe it was because his battle with his dark self had actually been more of a battle and not of a struggle. Yeah, he may have been facing himself, but it had been in such a way that Naruto had been able to disassociate himself from that of his darker half. This recent issue had not been a battle, it had been a struggle against his own feelings. The thoughts and emotions he had been trying to deal with had nothing to do with the dark side of himself that he had fought at the waterfall of truth, and everything to do with his own inner turmoil. It had been hard, one of the most difficult things he had ever done. Perhaps that was because Naruto was not used to dealing with his emotions and feelings, preferring to shove them to the back of his mind and lock them up in a vault tighter than the seal that had held Kurama had been. With them now being forced out, no doubt due to the bond he had with his Sekirei, Naruto was being forced to deal with them in short order. For some reason, he couldn't find it in himself to complain, or even regret what was happening. It was just another way the bond was changing him, he guessed. Whether that change had something to do with his own emotions being pulled from the depths of his mind where he had hidden them, or the emotions of his Sekirei simply subsuming his own conscience didn't seem as important now. In fact, Naruto found that the idea of his mind getting subverted by his Sekirei to be almost negligible. He really was apathetic. Turning his attention away from his own thoughts, Naruto took a small sip of his tea and looked up at the sky. It wasn't even midday yet, the sun was shining brightly overhead, with only a few sparse sprinkling of cumulus clouds scattered about like fluffy white pieces of cotton candy. The day was quite beautiful, he had to admit. It would have been the perfect day for an outing. Too bad Naruto was far too tired to even think about going out somewhere. It wasn't a physical exhaustion so much as a mental one brought about by the strain of his recent struggles, but he supposed that was neither here nor there. Penny for your thoughts? Asked a gentle voice that Naruto was coming to recognize almost as well as his Sekirei's. He turned his head slightly to see the lavender-haired beauty clad in her usual kimono standing behind and slightly to his left, her hands clasped in front of her as she stared at him with a gentle smile that had her eyes crinkling shut. Putting on a small smile of his own, albeit, one that looked a touch too tired for someone who looked so young, Naruto patted the wood paneling beside him. Mia-chan, he said, somehow managing to slip into his bright persona with a bit of extra effort. I was wondering when you would come. Mia raised an eyebrow at his choice of words, though whether she was truly surprised by them was anyone's guess. You were expecting me? She inquired, tilting her head to the side. Of course, Naruto replied, playing this game of dancing around each other with her. Quite a bit has happened today. Ku-chan, thinking she saw a ghost, said, Ghost, turning out to be a Sekirei who has been hiding out in your house, said Sekirei, reacting to me in a most perverted manner. The blonde paused, taking a moment to realize just how much of an understatement that was. The woman had literally tried to jump him. Shaking his head, he continued. There is also the fact that Matsu has apparently been peeping on me and all of Maison Izumo via spy cameras she set up in every room. Naruto made a quick note to himself that he needed to do a quick sweep of his room to make sure he got rid of any hidden surveillance cameras that might be there. It didn't matter who it was that was doing the spying, Naruto hated it when people spied on him. Mia's right eye twitched at the mention of Matsu's spy cameras. No doubt she was annoyed about the perverted Sekirei actually installing spy camera in some of the more private places like the bathhouse. Naruto was almost sure Mia had no problems with the other places Matsu had placed her cameras. In fact, he wouldn't be surprised if Mia actually encouraged the redhead to install cameras in his room. Naruto got the feeling that the landlady, despite all of her gentle and kind nature, was just as bad when it came to peeping on others as Matsu was. It is true that a lot has happened, Mia began, her eyes still looking at Naruto as the blonde turned his attention back to the courtyard. Perhaps it was in an effort to ease some of the slight tension that had picked up between them since the whole incident had ended, but Mia let loose a soft giggle. Maison Izumo has certainly become lively since Uzumaki-kun and his flock have come here. It's almost saddening to see such beautiful maidens having their hearts played with like that, and now he's got Matsu-san in his clutches as well. Mia put a hand to her cheek and sighed dramatically. Oh Takehito, what would you think if you realized that your dear wife was surrounded by such debauchery in her own home? Naruto snorted at the woman's jab at his apparent habits as a player who played with the hearts of women. Considering you had Kagari-san living here before I did and he actually works as a host at a club that women go to in order have a bunch of players lavish attention on them, I don't think you have any right to make fun of me. Now, sit down and drink your tea, he finished, pushing the second cup of tea he had made across the floor so Mia could see it. The lavenderette looked at the cup of steaming liquid, giggled, and made her way over to him. She sat down on his left, with about 6 inches of space between them. Close enough that she could offer him comfort if needed, but far enough that no one could possibly mistake them for anything other than friends. My flock, huh? Naruto said to himself, tasting the word the landlady had used to describe his growing harem. A wagtail reference, I take it? He asked, turning to look at Mia, who just smiled in return. Well, they are a bunch of little birds waiting to spread their wings, after all, she said, hiding her smile by taking a sip of her tea. As the cup left her lips, the smile disappeared and the two descended into an uncomfortable silence. Naruto knew that Mia had not come here to make small talk, she had a reason for coming to him, and if he were to follow the law of common sense, then it most likely had something to do with the recent incident with Matsu. He watched the woman out of the corner of his left eye, noting the way she was struggling. Her posture was a little tense, most people would never notice it, except he wasn't most people. Her eyes mostly focused on the horizon, but would occasionally glance over at him, only for her to worry her lower lip and look away. She wanted to ask him something, obviously, but was probably unsure on how to go about asking. He had already proven to be great at circumventing questions when he didn't want to answer, and she was most likely trying to find a way to stop that from happening. Well, he wouldn't be the one breaking this silence. Naruto wouldn't stop her from asking her questions, but he also wouldn't help her along with them by bringing whatever it was she wanted to ask up. Is it really so bad? She finally decided to break the silence by asking something. Naruto tilted his head, indicating that she needed to be a little more specific if she wanted him to answer. He knew what she was talking about, of course, but as he said, he had no intention of helping her along when it came to prying into his life. To have so many of my kind bound to you. Apparently she knew that he wasn't going to be giving her any help either, because she had decided to elaborate with her question. You know, I think that's the first time I've ever heard you admit to being a Sekirei, Naruto commented. Is it? Oh dear, Mia replied with a slight smile. I do hope I haven't startled you with this information. Naruto snorted and shook his head. I think I'll manage, he said dryly. You still haven't answered my question, Mia prodded him. It seemed she had managed to pick up on his stalling tactic and was in no mood for it. Yes and no. A heavy sigh escaped Naruto's lips as he began deciding on just how he should answer that question. It's difficult to explain, he began, frowning as he tried to put his reasoning into words. It was more difficult than he had expected. The idea of being with numerous beautiful women is the dream of every straight male. The blonde began with a bit of humor in order to give him time to come up with his answer. Even though harems are considered taboo in this day and age, it's still the desire of many males. Oh my, Mia started as she placed a hand on her cheek and looked away with a slight tremble. It seems Uzumaki-kun really has given into his lustful urges. Should I be worried about Uzumaki-kun attempting to seduce a poor widow like me? She asked, her expression taking on a look of worry. Naruto rolled his eyes at the woman for being so dramatic. Well, if I did make an attempt at seducing you, it probably wouldn't last very long before you gutted me with your sword, Naruto shot back. So I don't think you need to be worried about anything. From the smile on Mia's face, the blonde knew his words may not be quite the joke he had made it out to be. It just reaffirmed his beliefs that he should never try to seduce Mia. The smile on Mia's face left a moment later and her lips thinned slightly. Perhaps it would be a good idea for Uzumaki-kun to quit stalling, she said softly, and Naruto sighed, knowing that she wasn't going to allow him to circumvent her question. However, just because she was adamant that he answer her, didn't mean he was going to come out and reveal everything to her. He had learned the true art of lying without really lying. The key to telling someone a lie was to tell them the truth, or at least part of the truth, enough so that they wouldn't be able to question that what he said was a lie, but not enough that they would know the true secrets he was hiding. I've loved before, Naruto started, determining the path he would take with his answer. Years ago, I once believed just like Musubi did. I loved, and cherished, and formed powerful bonds with people I had grown to consider precious to me. They may have been nothing like the bond between a Sekirei and their Ashikabi is, I couldn't feel their emotions like I do with Akatsu, Musubi, Kusano, and now Matsu, but still. Naruto sighed and shook his head. The bonds I had formed with them were strong enough that if necessary I would have been willing to give my very existence to ensure their happiness. Mia was looking at him now, both of her eyes open as she studied him with a critical gaze. He had caught her attention, he knew. Naruto had never been this forthcoming with his past, always sticking to strange things he had seen and done during his travels, but never mentioning his origins. There was no question that the woman was very interested in what he had to say. Something must have happened, she prompted when Naruto remained silent. I take it that something happened to them, the people you formed these bonds with. They died, Naruto said, his tone clipped, emotionless as he forced himself to remain clinical. I was unable to protect them, I wasn't strong enough, wasn't smart enough, I lacked the power to truly do anything to help, and because of my incompetence they were killed. The blonde looked down at his hands and upon noticing how they were trembling, took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and forced them to stop. After that I realized that to love another was to invite heartache. The only way to avoid feeling the pain of someone you love leaving you was to not love at all. I traveled a lot after that, looking down at his hands and towards the courtyard. Never staying in one place long enough to form bonds, never allowing myself to grow close to anyone. I would get lonely occasionally, he admitted. But when that happened I would just find a woman willing to spend the night with me, having a warm body next to me at night seemed to help keep my nightmares at bay. It was a true testament to just how interested Mia was in learning his past that she did not even tease him for giving into his lustful urges, as she was wont to do. I traveled the world and did my best to never let myself truly feel. He smiled a depreciating smile as he leaned backwards, placing his hands behind his back and using his arms to support himself. I was alive but I never let myself live. I suppose you could say it was my hope that by deadening my emotions, I would no longer be able to feel pain. He chuckled a bit, but the only emotion it held was bitterness. Maybe I was trying to fool myself into believing that so long as I ignored my own feelings I could pretend there was nothing wrong with me. And there it was, Naruto had always known that he was broken, no one could be as apathetic as he truly claimed. No one could do the things he had done, watch the things he had seen and remain sane. It wasn't just the Fourth Great Shinobi War that had damaged him, probably even irreparably. Yet even then, after Naruto had realized that everything he had loved was gone, he had at least tried to move on, tried to live a life his friends would have been proud of, tried to create the world his sensei had dreamed of, a world of peace. How long had he traveled the world back then? Going from town to town and trying to spread his beliefs about peace and understanding. He didn't really know, there was no way he could truly know. It had happened such a long time ago that he could only remember what happened during those days. Those days where he had finally given up on humanity. When he had realized that no matter what he did, no matter how hard he preached, how many miracles he performed, humans could never learn to understand one another. Peace was a lie. And love would never be strong enough to triumph over everything. How could it when there was so much hatred in the world? So much greed. How could peace ever be achieved when humans were so flawed they refused to understand that everyone was the same? The answer was it couldn't, and Naruto doubted that would ever change. He could still remember that day so clearly, the day he had given up on his dreams and turned cold. It haunted him in his dreams just as much, perhaps even more, than the horror of losing his precious people during the Fourth Great Shinobi War. The feeling of a hand being placed upon his own snapped the blonde's attention back to reality. He looked over to see Mia giving him a gentle, understanding smile. I can only imagine how much you must have suffered to form such beliefs, she said, turning her body around so she could fully face him. She placed her other hand on his. It was the first form of true physical contact they had, and Naruto had the feeling it was the first time Mia had even touched a male that was not her husband. I think I can understand a little, she told him, her smile turning a little sad. When my husband first died, I had felt so lost. For a long time I was unable to do anything, I didn't know what to think, or what to feel. In many ways a large part of me died with my husband. When I lost him, not only had a part of me died, but I felt overwhelming guilt that he had died while I lived. During those first few months I had wanted nothing more than to die. Mia paused, and Naruto used that time to put his thoughts in perspective. He was surprised that Mia was willing to tell him this. The blonde was sure she had not told this to anybody else, and he was even more sure that she had never intended to tell anybody about this. That begged the question about why she was telling him. Was this her way of returning the favor for him revealing a little more about himself? Or perhaps it was because she felt connected to him due to their mutual experience with the pain of loss. It could have been either of those reasons or any number of other ones. He supposed that, in the end, it didn't quite matter why she was telling him. What was important was that she was willing to tell him of all people about her past. A part of him felt honored. That this powerful woman was willing to tell him about her own pain, even though it was probably just as difficult for her as it was for him, told him just how much trust she was willing to place in him. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. Maybe it was because he usually tended to stray when other people tried to load their problems on him, maybe he just felt like an intruder despite the fact that she was revealing her past to him willingly. Whatever the case was, Naruto decided that he would put aside his own discomfort in order to listen. Who knows, perhaps she was telling him simply to get this off her chest. Maybe she had kept her own pain hidden for so long that she needed someone to confide in, and if Naruto knew her pain then wasn't he the best option to talk to? You must be strong if you managed to overcome that kind of hardship, Naruto commented, and at his words, Mia took her hands off his and turned away, looking out at the sky with a soft smile. Not as strong as you might think, she admitted lightly, though with an undercurrent of emotion only someone like Naruto could place. In fact, if it hadn't been for Seo of all people, I don't think I would have ever been able to recover. Seo. Naruto blinked several times, nonplussed by this new knowledge. That scruffy ashikabi you constantly call trash and scum. Now this was something he had never seen coming. While Mia never outright said it, he was sure the landlady held, if not hatred, then at least extreme dislike for Seo. Mia giggled at him, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. The very same, she said, calming down as she looked back out at the courtyard. Despite the fact that I would constantly tell him how I didn't want to see him, he would still come in and check up on me every single day just to make sure I was okay. I see, Naruto said, his own mind working around her words. I suppose that's why you put up with him even though I can tell you don't really like him all that much. It was clear that neither Mia nor Seo really got along very well, they still remained somewhat, slightly, cordial with each other. At first, Naruto had just thought it was due to their relationship with Mia's husband, but perhaps there was more to their relationship than anyone else really knew. With that in mind, the way they acted towards each other made sense. Well, and he happened to be my husband's best friend, Mia said with another giggle. It would be rude of me to deny helping someone my husband had befriended just because he's scum. You foo 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 foo. As Mia began to giggle some more, Naruto promptly felt a large drop of sweat beginning to form on his head. Okay, so maybe Mia didn't really like Seo and only just put up with him because of his friendship with Takehito. God, women were so weird. Let them in, Naruto blinked, then turned to look over at Mia. She wasn't looking at him, but at the sky above them, a gentle smile on her face that crinkled her eyes. It's clear to me that you are a kind-hearted young man who needs help. You have suffered so much that you're denying your own feelings and not giving yourself the chance to heal. She turned and directed her smile at him. Let them into your heart, and I can guarantee you won't regret doing so. Naruto stared at the woman for a little while longer, going over her words. She made it sound so easy, like all he had to do was reach out and accept them into his life and everything would be okay. And perhaps to most people it was. Were he a normal human who had suffered something as simple as heartbreak, then maybe letting himself fall in love would make everything better. If nothing else, the bond that formed between a Sekirei and their Ashikabi would normally be strong enough to heal all wounds of the heart. If things were as simple as he had led Mia to believe. But things weren't so simple. It wasn't just a matter of giving in and letting himself love the four he had bonded to. They were mortal, and as such any bonds he may form, any love he may find, would eventually disappear from his life. That was his curse. To never be able to form a bond with another person without feeling his heart break when they died, to be unable to fall in love because any love he may find was too fleeting to last more than 100 years at most, to never be strong enough to protect his precious people, because no matter how much strength or power he had, there were some things that even he could not protect people from. Time. It all came down to time. Naruto had all the time in the world and no use for it. Everyone else had so little time and wanted more. No matter what happened in this world, time would continue moving, flowing, a never-changing concept, an unstoppable force. The unstoppable force. It was the one thing that no one could defeat, the most powerful force in the entire world, no, the entire universe. Because even the stars were born and killed in time. Maybe you're right, Naruto found himself saying, his eyes closing as his own mind warred with itself. Would be so bad, he wondered, if he allowed himself to fall in love. To love and be loved in return. A part of him knew the pain that awaited him at the end of this journey. If he let himself fall in love, allowed these bonds to run their course, he would only get hurt in the end. But wouldn't it be worth it? Even if it was only for a little while, even if this was only a temporary escape, wasn't love something worth fighting for? He wanted to feel love. By the sage did he want to feel love. Naruto didn't even care if it was the bond that had caused these emotions that now stirred within him. It didn't matter if these weren't his thoughts, his feelings. Naruto acknowledged that he wanted to be able to love. To find love, to learn to love, to make new bonds with others. To protect what was most precious to him. Akatsu, Matsu, Musubi, Kusano. Maybe if let them they really could heal his heart. Even if it was only temporary, it would still be nice. Of course I'm right, Mia said, her perennial smile back in place. Really, Uzumaki-kun, you should know better than to question a married woman when it comes matters of the heart. Naruto couldn't help but let out a chuckle at her words. Grinning, he looked over at the woman with an amused twinkle in his eyes. Indeed, how careless of me, he said, chuckling a little more. I should have realized by now that no man can understand matters of love better than women, especially for one as incredible as Mia-chan. He adopted a thoughtful expression, tapping his right index finger against his chin. Does that mean I should ask Mia-chan what the best way to get into a woman's heart? Perhaps she would let me practice with her so I can get it right, he finished, waggling his eyebrows suggestively at the woman in question. Only to receive a smack to the head. OWCH. Now, Mia said pleasantly. You should know better than to say such things to a widow like me, Uzumaki-kun. I may end up taking offense to them. Duly noted, Naruto grimaced as he absently poked the small lump that had begun to form on his head. How did she hit so hard without using any momentum to increase the strength of her strike? He looked at the implement she had whacked him with and frowned. Just where did you get that ladle? I could have sworn you had not been carrying it when you walked out here. He was of course, referring to the steel ladle the landlady was now tapping against the palm of her open hand like it was some kind of blunt weapon. She couldn't have had it sealed, no one but him knew Fuinjutsu. Could she have hidden it up one of her sleeves? They were certainly wide enough. Or maybe she had the fabled female pocket dimension. The dimensional pocket all women are said to possess that allows them to carry thousands of items no matter how large within their clothing. He thought it was a myth that came from anime, but maybe there was more truth to those stories than he thought. Perhaps you just need to pay more attention, Uzumaki-kun, Mia replied cheerfully, causing Naruto to huff. As Mia began giggling at him, no doubt taking some kind of innate pleasure at having got one over on him, the loud sound of feet thumping down the halls had the two turning their heads to look at the open entrance to the house just as Uzume burst into view. There you are. She shouted at Naruto, causing the blonde to wonder why she was so excited. Even Mia had an eyebrow raised. Something up, Uzume? Asked Naruto, looking at the busty star-shirted Sekirei curiously. Hey, you bet your butt something's up, she started with a grin. I have something I want to show you. And with that, she walked over, grabbed the blonde's arm, and hauled him to his feet. Now come on. Get off your butt or you might miss it. What? Naruto started in surprise, stumbling as the woman dragged him away from a laughing Mia and into the hallways. You Uzume, where the hell are you taking me? What am I going to miss? Uzume didn't stop dragging him as she looked back at him with a large grin on her face. Something you're going to love. XOX. Ta-da. Uzume began as she made a dramatic gesture towards Naruto's Sekirei as they all lined up in a row. Grinning, she looked at the blinking blonde as he stood in front of his four Sekirei. So watcha think. Pretty nice, huh? She said, grinning wickedly at the blonde as he stood there looking stupefied. Are those maid outfits? He asked bluntly. Indeed, all of his Sekirei sans Kusano were wearing what looked to be maid outfits, though perhaps the term, naughty maids, might be more apt when describing their clothing. The outfits themselves seemed to consist of a brief black dress and an apron. The skirts came up abnormally high on their thighs, enough so that if his Sekirei were to bend over they would give him a panty flashing for the ages. The upper half of the dress was low-cut and displayed just enough cleavage to tantalize and tease the senses, and the apron itself only tied around the back near the hips and not at the neck like the usual apron. Instead it was tucked into the front where their cleavage was exposed so that it allowed for the dress to show off his Sekirei's assets. The outfits were finished by a collar that wrapped around their necks and fastened with a lacy bow, but were not connected to the rest of the outfit, and a bonnet, the headpiece that came standard with most maid outfits. The dresses themselves were all in different colors. Musubi's was light pink, Akatsu's was an ice blue, and Matsu was wearing a dark red maid outfit. All in all they looked like a hentai's wet dream. What do you think, Naruto-sama? Asked Musubi, twirling around to show off her outfit and inadvertently giving the blonde a perfect flash of her panties. The blonde found himself blinking as he tried to process the marvel before him. He had seen Musubi naked a number of times. Hell, he had slept with her naked and the only reason they had stopped was because of Mia. The sight of Musubi in a maid outfit should not be enough to make fry his brain like this. Still, there was just something about this girl in a skimpy little maid costume. They're so nice, aren't they? She finished her twirl and struck a pose. Kusano seemed to get into the same spirit as Musubi and soon she was striking an identical pose as the excitable Sekirei. Not long after that the two began twirling about in some kind of strange dance. Naruto-tan, Matsu's whine brought the blonde's attention to the other woman, and Naruto found himself gulping as the redhead bent forward so that he could see down her shirt and began hefting her chest with the palm of her hands. What do you think of my outfit? She asked with a pout that seemed both childish and seductive. Naruto found himself not only at a loss for words, but was also having difficulty deciding who to look at. Naruto's head snapped towards his left as Akatsu decided to get in on this charade. She grabbed a hold of his hand and the blonde almost had a heart attack when Akatsu, shy, subservient Akatsu, pressed his arm directly into her magnificent cleavage. Do you like my clothes, Ashikabi-sama? URK, Naruto felt his head starting to spin as he found himself surrounded by so much feminine flesh that Jiraiya would have died from blood hemorrhaging were he in the blonde's place. You look, I mean, all of you look. Well, damn it. Why was this so hard? He had wooed thousands of women in his life. Handing out compliments were as easy to him as killing. It was he who made the woman fall into stuttering messes, not the other way around. You girls look The blonde tried again, only to blink when he realized Akatsu's outfit was slightly different than Matsu's and Musubi's. Is that a choker around your neck? He asked, then blinked again. And why are your hands shackled together? Naruto didn't even bother commenting on the fact that the ice user was still wearing her normal chains around her neck. By now he was so used to their presence that they just didn't register anymore. Akatsu looked down at her gleaming steel where her hands were shackled together. I like them, she admitted, and Naruto felt his eye begin to twitch. Hey, cat got your tongue, bro? Asked Uzume, her grin widening even further as it took on a cat that ate the canary quality to it. The blonde managed to get over the brain damage he had received by seeing so many magnificent female specimens at once to send the feisty tomboy a glare. So this was the girl's plan. Dress up his Sekirei in sexy maid outfits and have them come at him at once in order to leave him a stuttering foolish mess. Well, he couldn't have that. It had been a long time since anyone had something like this over on one Uzumaki Naruto. He wasn't some 18-year-old virgin who had never experienced the pleasures of the flesh. He was the one who gave the women unimaginable pleasure. He would show this girl what happened when you messed with Uzumaki Naruto. The blonde's potential plotting for revenge was halted when something grabbed onto his right pant leg and began pulling. Looking down, Naruto saw Kusano looking up at him in what was thankfully not a maid costume. Unlike his other Sekirei, the green girl was wearing some kind of bird outfit. It was rounded and puffy, and reminded Naruto of those ridiculous costumes one might expect to see in a school play. Belatedly, the blonde recognized the costume as a wagtail. The girl was looking up at him with large green eyes, and Naruto felt familiar old feelings beginning to stir. Hey, well, don't you just look cute? Naruto grinned as he placed a hand on Kusano's covered head. So what are you supposed to be? A wagtail? He asked, his grin widening when the little girl nodded her head up and down and replied with an enthusiastic, uh-huh. With the arrival of Kusano and her costume, Naruto felt his own mental fortitude realign. Smiling up at his Sekirei, he said, all of you look amazing. He felt a moment of satisfaction when Akatsu and Matsu both gained a light flush on their cheeks. He would have been disappointed when all Musubi did was cheer, but considering how naive that girl was, he supposed he should just be thankful she at least recognized the compliment for what it was. He looked over at Uzume and smirked when he saw the busty tomboy looking at him in shock. That should serve her for thinking she could mess with him. So what's the occasion? Asked Naruto as he turned back to look at his Sekirei. We're going to be making Naruto-sama lunch. Musubi crowed, pumping her fist into the air. Once more Kusano decided to get into the act as she too pumped her fist into the air as well. Akatsu nodded slowly as she agreed with Musubi. Yes, she said. Naruto blinked several times. Lunch? He asked, tilting his head. That's right, Naruto-tan, Matsu said, claiming his attention. We've all decided to show our love for Naruto-tan by making him lunch. Naruto looked at the redhead skeptically. Can you even cook lunch? He asked. While he knew Musubi was a decent chef, even if the only thing she could cook was curry, Matsu didn't really look like the type who would know her way around the kitchen. In fact, Naruto doubted Matsu would be able to tell a spatula from a ladle. Of course Matsu can cook, Matsu said, puffing her cheeks out as she pouted at him childishly. The redhead pointed a finger at him, one hand on her hip and feet spread apart in a stance that looked like something you would see in a manga. Just you wait, Naruto-tan. Matsu will show you. I'll cook the best lunch you've ever had. By the time you finish eating my food you'll be begging me to be your permanent cook. You'll fall so in love with my cooking that you'll lose control and all that pent-up lust you possess will break out and you'll ravish me on the kitchen table. Oh ha ho ha ho ha ho. Having finished with her speech, Matsu raised a hand to her mouth and began to laugh in a manner that Naruto had seen from female antagonists that were often found in mangas. He promptly sweat dropped, and watched as Matsu began dragging his other Sekirei down the stairs. When they disappeared down the stairs, Naruto sighed, and began making his own way downstairs, a still grinning Uzume following him. He sincerely hoped that letting those four cook for him wouldn't end in disaster. XOX. Oh dear. Matsu-san, what happened to you? Asked Mia, one hand raised to her mouth and her eyes open in honest surprise. Naruto looked up from where he was sitting at the table and watching the news to see Matsu, her entire face blackened by soot and ash, and her hair looking burnt. Considering she had been in the kitchen helping Musubi and the others cook, it didn't take a genius to figure out what happened. Ah, well, Matsu looked away as an embarrassed flush appeared on her face. Matsu was helping out in the kitchen and Matsu just turned the heat up on one of the stoves too high. It sort of blew up in her face. The blush on her face increased to even greater hues, so much so that it stood out in stark contrast to the blackened soot that covered it. Akatsu-tan and the others told Matsu that she should probably wait out here. Oh my, are you alright, Matsu-san? Asked Mia, her voice reflecting her concern. Matsu grimaced a bit, but quickly waved off the woman's worry. Matsu's fine, don't worry about me, she started, quickly making her way over to the table in an effort to make the woman focus on something other than her failure in the kitchen. However, just because she attempted leaving Mia's presence, didn't mean all of her problems had ended. Had some trouble in the kitchen, I see, Naruto commented as the redhead sat down with a plop, smiling when the woman's cheeks flashed pink. With a groan, Matsu hid her head in between her arms as she set them on the table. Chuckling at the girl's misfortune, the blonde said, see, cooking is a lot harder than it looks, isn't it? Hey, Uzume chuckled as well from her place across from Naruto. She was sprawled out, her legs stretched out under the table and her hands being used for support as she leaned back. The busty Sekirei had been a bit quiet for the most part, likely still dealing with the surprise of having Naruto get over the sight of his Sekirei in her cosplay outfits. Matu's not really the type of person you would expect to see in a kitchen. Not Uzume-tan too, Matsu groaned, her voice muffled by her arms. Alright, fine, so Matsu don't have any talent at cooking. Are you happy? She asked, sounding miffed that she was actually admitting she couldn't cook. Naruto chuckled some more. Well, I wouldn't say I'm happy, he stated with a small smile. Setting the elbow of his left hand on the table, the blonde leaned forward and propped his cheek on the butt of his hand. But I am glad you realize that cooking is a tad more difficult than it looks. It took a lot of hard work to learn how to properly cook. When Naruto had first started he had been horrible at it, so bad that one time he had actually managed to burn water. However, through perseverance and hard work, he had eventually began learning the ins and outs of working in the kitchen. To be honest, he was actually surprised Musubi knew how to cook so well, even if all she could make was curry. HMPH. Matsu huffed as she sat up, crossed her arms under her bust, and looked away. If Musubi-tan and Ku-tan can do it, then Matsu should be able to do it too. Ku-chan's probably only being given small tasks, Naruto stated boredly. And Musubi only knows how to make curry. She'd probably had someone teach her how to make it and practiced it so often that making it has become second nature to her. He looked over at Matsu and raised an eyebrow. Can you say you've done the same? Well, no, but still, Matsu pouted at him, her lower lip sticking out in a childish display. Naruto chuckled one more time, before switching gears and deciding to talk about something else. So hey, Matsu, he began, making the girl stop pouting and turned her attention back to him. Just why have you been hiding out in Maison Izumo? He asked, allowing his curiosity to finally get the better of him now that the incident caused by her reaction had passed. Both Mia and Uzume had been rather adamant in claiming that Matsu didn't exist. He couldn't help but be curious about why they were so intent on keeping the redhead's existence a secret. Well, Matsu rubbed the back of her head when she began to laugh sheepishly. You see, when I left MBI I may have gotten into a spot of trouble. She began to blush, and her hands moved away from their current positions to cover her face in a futile attempt to hide it. No, more like a lot of trouble, she amended almost reluctantly. So you're a fugitive. Asked Naruto, only partially surprised by this information. After all, it wasn't like there were that many people Matsu would need to hide from. Off the top of his head, Naruto could only think of one other person besides MBI that Matsu may have needed to hide out from. Izumi Higa, the Ashikabi of the East. You don't have to put it so bluntly, Matsu mumbled with a pout. When Naruto just deadpanned, she turned her head to the side. In the end, I had to come here in order to hide. The blonde blinked, and then glanced over at Mia, who had now taken a seat at her usual spot at the end of the table in front of the television. When she noticed his gaze, the landlady offered a smile. As I said before, she started. It was my husband's policy to never turn away someone in need. Well, I can definitely see why Matsu would come here for protection, Naruto said thoughtfully. If the redhead was on the run from MBI, then the only place she would really be safe was with someone who had enough power that the people at the top would deem obtaining her to not be worth the effort. It said a lot about Mia's power. If Mia's strength was such that MBI was unwilling to go after Matsu for whatever crime she had committed for fear of bringing the landlady's full might on their heads, it meant that either Mia could match the entire might of MBI or it would take far too much effort and resources to capture Matsu. Whatever the case was, it only confirmed to him that Mia was not someone who you wanted to get on the bad side of. Returning to the matter at hand, Naruto focused on the redhead once more. So just what did you do to make yourself a fugitive from MBI? Ah. Matsu let out a strangled gasp. She looked at Naruto with slightly wide eyes. Well. A quick glance over at Mia caused the blonde's focus to split, and as he watched the Lavenderette shake her head, his eyes narrowed in thought. Now Naruto was curious. It was clear that Matsu had done something monumental if Mia was still intent on keeping it a secret from him. He couldn't help but wonder as to what the redhead had done that would warrant so much secrecy. He would have pondered the question some more, but at that moment, Musubi and the others came out of the kitchen and walked into the room, each of them carrying 2 large plates piled high with curry. Lunch is ready. Musubi called out as she walked over to the table and set her plates of food down, one in front of Naruto and the other off to his left. She then sat down as well. It was her turn to sit next to him today, so she sat directly on his left. The naive Sekirei gave the blonde a beaming smile as she sat down. I hope you like the food we made for you, Naruto-sama. Naruto gave the girl an easy smile. I'm sure I'll love it, he assured her as Kusano put one of her plates in front of a smiling Mia and the other on his right, before sitting down next to him. Akatsu also finished serving Uzume and Matsu, putting a plate down in front of the two before grabbing the one that had been precariously balanced on her head and setting it down in the spot she would be sitting at. When everyone was seated, they began to eat. So how is it, Naruto-sama? Asked Musubi as she watched the blonde take a bite of the curry. Naruto looked up at the girl, then, as if feeling the eyes of others on him, looked around to see that Akatsu and Kusano were also staring at him very intently. It wasn't so disturbing to see Akatsu doing that, but it was a tad unnerving to see Kusano giving him such an intense look. Still, Naruto managed to keep his composure as he smiled at the girls. It's great, he complimented. You 3 really are amazing chefs. Akatsu looked over at him, blushed heavily, and then looked down at her place. Musubi had a much more cheerful reaction. That's because curry's my specialty. The excitable fist fighter crowed as she pumped her fist in the air. Sitting on the other side of Naruto, Kusano followed suit and pumped her own fist into the air and mimicked the Sekirei she seemed to take after the most. My specialty. She repeated with excitement. Oh sure, rub it in, why don't you? Matsu muttered to herself, though Naruto heard it and gave the redhead a glance. Rolling his eyes, the blonde took another bite of his food. It really was good, he thought with a nostalgic smile. It reminded him a lot of the curry of life he'd had back during his mission with Fuzzy Brows, Neji, and Tenten when they had to fight Kurosuke Raiga at the Katabami mine, only without the fire-breathing heat that came with that curry. So if you worked for MBI, you must know a lot about the company, huh? Naruto stated after he finished swallowing a bite of curry. Matsu looked at Naruto as she swallowed a bite of her own food, and then gave him a proud smile. MB's not the only thing I know a lot about, she proclaimed. After all, as a Sekirei I don't have much fighting potential, but that's because my talents lie in information gathering. At her words Naruto stopped eating, the chopsticks that had been just inches away from his mouth were put down, and he straightened up so he could stare at the woman with a much more calculating gaze. Information gathering, you say? He asked with interest. You mean like what you did with those spy cameras you have set up around Maison Izumo? I'm not just good with spy cameras, Naruto-tan, Matsu stated, not even noticing the change that had overcome Naruto. In fact, the only person who seemed to notice was the one who always seemed to spot these changes when it came to the young man, and she was watching the blonde himself more than she was the byplay going on between the two. The redhead continued completely, oblivious to both Naruto's expression and Mia's glance at the blonde in question. My abilities are the power to access and analyze any electronic device on a telepathic level, though I can't control them remotely yet. In other words, Matsu-san's power is the ability to peep on anyone, anywhere, Mia stated pleasantly and with a beautiful smile. Her words seemed to cause Matsu to deflate, the redhead's posture slumping. Mia-tan, Matsu whined childishly. I thought I told you that's not what it's called. Can't you call it, Eye of the Electronic Brain? She asked piteously, and Naruto got the impression that this was a long-standing debate between the two. It's not just used for peeping, Matsu continued with a childish pout. I was always able to utilize my abilities to break into many databases, including MBIs. Wait, Naruto stood up straighter, his eyes now taking on a sharp quality that only Kusano and Musubi seemed to miss. Akatsu might have too, but that was likely because she simply didn't care. You're telling me that you can hack into MBI's database? He asked, his voice holding an intensity that had Uzume looked at him in surprise, and Mia narrowing her eyes. Hack. Musubi blinked, tilting her head at the curious expression. Is that like discretion? She asked, tilting her head. Naruto ignored her in favor of staring at Matsu, who seemed to be shrinking in on herself at the sight of his potent gaze on her. She nodded, her back hunching even further as Naruto leaned forward. So you can gain entry into MBI's database at any time. Whenever you want? He asked, wanting to confirm that what he had just been told was true. Well, yeah, Matsu said with a nod, sounding reluctant. Matsu, you. As Naruto tried to come up with the appropriate words, Matsu's posture became even more slumped and guarded. It wasn't until the blonde's next words came out that her fear was replaced by surprise. Are the most incredible woman I have ever met. He crowed. Matsu blinked, her mind trying to replay the blonde's words in a form that was understandable, because apparently she was lost. Uzume was gawking at the blonde, no doubt due to his outburst, and Mia was staring at him with an expressionless gaze. Once again, the only people who didn't react to his words like normal people were his own Sekirei. Akatsu because she had been staring at him the whole time, except when he looked at her, in which case she would blush and look away. And Musubi and Kusano who merely looked confused. Another second ticked by before Matsu seemed to realize what Naruto had just said. Her blinking turned into wide eyes and she sat up straighter. I am. She asked, no doubt confused by how the blonde had just gone from hard and calculating to ecstatic so quickly. Naruto gave her a serious nod. Information is power, Naruto stated, speaking from experience. Matsu, if you can hack into MBI's system at any time, then that means you can gain any form of information on the Sekirei plan. Information on all of the Ashikabi, their Sekireis, MBI's goals, their plans, everything. It was easy to see that Naruto was excited, but the others probably had no idea of just how excited he truly was or why. The ability to learn everything he had been lacking knowledge on when it came to the Sekirei plan. The entire time he had been here, the blonde had been flying blind. He knew nothing about the Sekirei or the Sekirei plan except for the basics, and even then Naruto was sure he was lacking. But now he could learn everything he had wanted to know, all of the information he needed to make more informed decisions, to plan. With the ability to learn everything about the Sekirei plan and the people involved, Naruto could not only find out just what he had gotten himself into, but also determine the best course of action he could take. In terms of resources, Matsu had just given him the ultimate ace. And to think he had actually been reluctant to wing her before. You know, Uzume began, sounding a little freaked out by how Naruto was acting. When you put it like that, it sounds really ominous. Matsu nodded her head as she completely ignored her detractor. Puffing up her chest in self-importance, she gave Naruto a large smile as she soaked in his praise. That's right, Naruto-tan, she said in a self-important tone of voice. There aren't that many brain-type Sekirei like me, so not many other Ashikabi have access to this kind of information. It was clear that she was trying to bump up her own self-worth with that information, but Naruto was already impressed enough. Oh my, Uzumaki-kun seems awfully excited, doesn't he? Mia said in a pleasant voice, though when the male in question glanced at her he noticed that she was still studying him intently. I've been in Shinto Tito for a total of 9 days, Naruto stated. And in those 9 days, I have suddenly found myself bound to 3 Sekirei, one who was being chased by 2 girls who looked like something out of an S&M store that could shoot lightning out of their hands, another who was apparently scrapped, and somehow managed to escape from the labs they kept her in, and a little girl who has the power to increase the rate of plant growth so much that in only a day, she managed to turn the arboretum into a complete jungle. Ever since I first got here, I've been flying by the seat of my pants, completely blind and unable to do anything more than react. The amount of rookie mistakes I've made has been ridiculous and could have been easily avoided if I'd had the necessary information at the time. He kept his eyes on Mia, not flinching as he stared at the woman. I'm sure you can understand why I'm so excited. Mia seemed to take in his words with a casual ease. Her posture relaxed, as did her intense studying of him. Yes, she admitted with a nod. I suppose I can understand that. Wait, said Uzume, drawing attention to herself. Do you mean to say that you don't know what the Sekirei plan is? She asked curiously. Beyond what the president of MBI told me, no, Naruto admitted. The only thing I know is that the Sekirei plan is some kind of battle royal where Sekirei are released into the city, have to find their Ashikabi, and then have to fight until only one Sekirei is left standing. Then that Sekirei gets some kind of prize or something. Here the blonde snorted. And Minaka wasn't very forthcoming in telling me what that prize was. Just mentioning some garbage about descending to the higher skies above and bringing about a new age of the gods. Matsu adjusted her glasses as she looked at Naruto a bit more intently, seemingly reevaluating her opinions of him. So you managed to accomplish all of this, winning 3 Sekirei, rescuing Kusano, and winning a scrapped number without a single clue as to what you were doing. Pretty much, Naruto admitted with a shrug. That's actually pretty impressive, Matsu admitted. I knew you had only been in the city for 9 days, but I hadn't realized you had been working with so little information. Didn't your Sekirei tell you more about the Sekirei plan? They should have at some point. Matsu, look at my other Sekirei, Naruto said, gesturing to Musubi, who was tilting her head from side to side and had a near-permanent expression of confusion on her face. Kusano, who seemed to have grown bored with the conversation and was now playing with her food, making thrumming noises as she moved her spoon around her plate, and Akatsu, who blushed the moment Naruto looked at her and went back to staring at her plate. I see your point, Matsu muttered as she realized that none of the other Sekirei were in any position to actually tell him about the Sekirei plan. Musubi knew nothing more than Minaka had told him. Akatsu was a scrapped number and therefore was not likely to have been told anything, and Kusano was a child who wasn't even supposed to have been released for another couple of months. None of them would have been able to give him any of the information he wanted. Right, Naruto said with a nod before he took a large bite out of his curry. Maybe he should remake the Curry of Life restaurant and use Musubi's curry as the main recipe. Shaking his head, he refocused on his original topic, pointing his chopsticks at Matsu. So, as soon as lunch is over you and I are going to have our first strategy session. Right. If Matsu's smile had been capable of getting any wider, Naruto was sure it would have ripped her face in half. XOX. You know, when you said that you wanted to hold a strategy session, Matsu complained with a childish whine. I had assumed it was going to be just the 2 of us, she pouted and glared at those she seemed to consider intruders into her private time with her Ashikabi. Naruto tilted his head at the brain-type Sekirei, before looking over at the other occupants in the room. Akatsu was sitting slightly behind him and to his left, and laying across the ground with her feet kicking in the air as she drew on a piece of paper with a set of crayons was Kusano. He had also invited Musubi, but the fist fighter had wanted to spar with Mia instead. Naruto figured that was for the best. No doubt the girl would have been too restless to sit still while Matsu started giving him the information he wanted. It was only an hour after lunch that Naruto found himself in Matsu's room, watching as she scuttled about on all fours like some kind of overgrown crab. Occasionally she would plop down in front of a specific keyboard and begin typing away at speeds that would put most Jonin's ability to make hand seals to shame. As she worked the keyboard over with what were obviously expert hands, several select pieces of data would appear on each screen. Naruto saw maps of Shinto Tito, long streams of code, images, video feed, and just about every form of data he could think of. While most people would not have been very impressed by watching someone type away at a keyboard, Naruto, being someone who had been forced to learn about computers and everything involved out of necessity, found himself impressed. Consider them my insurance policy for keeping you in line, Naruto said easily. The redhead had already proven herself to be a complete pervert. He was sure that if they were left alone she would try something. For the moment, he needed her focused on nothing but delivering all of the information she had on the Sekirei plan. I need information on this Sekirei plan, and don't have time for us to get up to anything Mia-chan might consider illicit. Matsu giggled a little bit. I still can't believe you actually call her that, she told him in between giggles. Then again, I think I'm even more surprised that she actually lets you call her that. When Naruto shrugged, but didn't respond verbally, Matsu seemed to realize he was being quite serious and stopped giggling, her face taking on a bit more of a serious quality to it. So what do you want to know? She asked, turning fully to face him, the light from her monitors gently silhouetting her form in the low-lit room. Let's start with the basics first, Naruto said, his eyes narrowing. Just what are Sekirei? What are Sekirei? Matsu blinked, nonplussed. Do you mean to tell me you don't even know what a Sekirei is? She asked incredulously. She looked like she had just been knocked for a loop. The redhead was probably appalled that he didn't even know something so basic. As I said, the only thing I know is that a Sekirei are some kind of superhumans who are released into the city by MBI to meet their ashikabi, who is like their mate, or life partner, and then battle in accordance with the Sekirei plan, Naruto said with a shake of his head. You need to remember that the Sekirei I bonded to before winging you don't actually know much about the Sekirei plan. He could have asked Uzume or Mia of course, maybe even Kagari, about the Sekirei plan, but none of those options sounded appealing to him. Uzume wasn't his Sekirei, and therefore there was a good chance they would eventually become enemies. Why would she tell him something that could potentially endanger her ashikabi? Mia probably knew a lot about the Sekirei plan. Her husband was the lead geneticist that was responsible for the adjustments of Sekirei before he died, and Mia herself was the most powerful creature he had met since Uchiha Madara. But she seemed determined to keep her origins a secret, and had only admitted to being a Sekirei today. As for Kagari, well, aside from the fact that the man was a ghost most of the time, Naruto had begun feeling uneasy in the fire user's presence due to extenuating circumstances. So none of those options were viable as far as he was concerned. Right, Matsu grimaced, seeming to realize just how bad his lack of information truly was. Well, to start, we Sekirei aren't human, she said. Naruto's blink was the only sign of his confusion. We're not from Earth. We came from another planet far beyond this solar system, and our spaceship crash-landed here where it sunk into the ocean for 1,000 years and was only unearthed due to a large earthquake causing an island to rise from the sea with our ship around 20 years ago. Naruto leaned back as he was just hit by this new piece of information. You mean to say that Sekirei aren't superhumans manufactured by MBI through some kind of genetic manipulation, but are in actuality a race of aliens that Manaka found when the land your ship crashed on was raised from the ocean? He asked, his voice sounding shocked. Well, yeah, Matsu said, looking at the blonde strangely. You didn't actually think we were humans, did you? To be honest, yes, Naruto admitted, rubbing the back of his head. I was under the impression that you were all just humans that MBI had kidnapped and experimented on in order to try and create some kind of super soldiers, and that the Sekirei plan was more or less a testing ground to see how much combat potential each type of Sekirei had. Matsu looked at him for a second, before shaking her head and sighing. You are so lucky, incredibly lucky that I reacted to you when I did. even more so that you managed to make it so far into the Sekirei plan on so little information. She smiled at him. Guess it's a good thing I'm your Sekirei now, huh? Yes, Naruto agreed with a nod. A very good thing. Matsu's cheeks actually went slightly red from his agreeing with her, probably having not meant her words to be anything more than a joke. Not that Naruto was paying as much attention to her reaction as he thought about what she had told him. Sekireis were not human, they were aliens who had crash-landed on Earth around 1,000 years ago. While at first it seemed to be unreal bordering on ridiculous, the more Naruto thought about it the more it made sense. The only thing that had Naruto doubting her words was that he had not heard about any spaceship crashing into Earth 1,000 years ago. However, that could easily be explained away by him not being on this side of the world when it happened. Back then, there was no way to send large-scale information from one side of the world to the other like there is these days. In most countries on the eastern side of the world had taken a very isolationist stance during that time. To top it off, Naruto did not have the network he did now back then. In which case, there would have been no way for him to know about this incident. 1,000 years ago. Naruto sighed as he tried to remember what he had been doing back then. It was hard, by that point in time he had pretty much been completely lost to his own darkness, moving from one country to another as life passed him by in a blur. Shaking his head, Naruto dispelled his thoughts and looked at Matsu. Okay, so, he straightened a bit and went over the information one more time. Sekirei are an alien race whose ship crash landed in the ocean, which rose up due to an earthquake 20 years ago, he frowned. I actually heard something about that when I was in Europe. Something about large-scale shifting of the tectonic plates raising an island that had ruins on it. There had been some rumors at one point that the ruins had been the lost city of Atlantis. Which was just ridiculous of course, because Atlantis wasn't a lost city that had sunk into the ocean. It had simply become a crater when Naruto destroyed it. I remember hearing about a joint military force of several unaffiliated nations consisting of 3 attack wave formations including ground forces, air forces, and ship forces had gone there to investigate the site and were lost during transit. He looked at Matsu with slightly narrowed eyes. Though I'm guessing it would be more accurate to say they were destroyed. Yes, that's right, Matsu said, and it was now her turn to give him a contemplative look. I'm surprised you know so much about that. MBI had done everything it could to cover that entire incident up, including going so far as to erase the island's existence from every map and satellite so that no one would be able to find it. Naruto shrugged and gave her a mysterious smile. Didn't you know, I'm a wanderer. As someone who's traveled the world, I'm very good at keeping my ears to the ground. Matsu looked at him for a moment, then smiled. It seems that Naruto-tan is a very mysterious person, she told him, adjusting her glasses. So I've been told, Naruto replied with a pleasant smile. It left him a moment later as he focused back on his objectives. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Manaka was the one who first uncovered the island, yes. That's right, Hiroto Manaka was one of 2 students, the other being a female named Sahashi Takami. Arrived to investigate, Matsu began to once more go into her explanation. As she did, her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up an image of the island they were discussing onto the screen in the very center on the bottom row. The island looked like nothing more than a large spiral outcropping of rocks. That's how it all began, she said ominously. What would later become the Sekirei plan had its beginnings on that day. They dubbed the site, Kamakura Island, Matsu continued. And discovered what appeared to be ruins, but upon closer inspection realized it was an enormous spacecraft of some sort. Inside they discovered a veritable treasure trove of advanced technology. Of the 2 who discovered the island, the male was an eccentric who was dubbed a super genius and the brightest mind of the university. Naruto snorted at her description of the man. From what he had seen, eccentric didn't even begin to describe the amount of crazy Manaka possessed. That makes a lot more sense than genetically enhanced humans, Naruto admitted to her. It also explains how MBI was formed. I'm guessing that Manaka managed to reverse engineer the technology he discovered inside of the spaceship and sell it piecemeal in order to build his company. It would certainly explain how MBI had managed to form so quickly. 20 years is a very short time for a company to get itself off the ground. After all, much less for it to begin the leading corporation when it comes to cutting-edge technology. That's right, Matsu said with a smile. She seemed proud that Naruto was able to come to the correct conclusion without her outright telling him. If he had her pinned right, Matsu admired intelligence above all else. Except maybe perversion. But he found more than just advanced alien technology, the redhead continued. Within that ship he found 108 life forms. And by life forms, you're talking about Sekirei, Naruto stated. It was not a question. Yes, that's right, Matsu replied, adjusting her glasses as she continued speaking. There were 108 Sekireis, one was in an adult form, 8 were fetuses, and the other 99 were found in a fertilized egg stage. I see, Naruto hummed. I'm guessing that this holds some kind of significance. He looked at Matsu and narrowed his eyes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the 9 Sekirei who were in the embryonic stage are inherently more powerful than the 99 that were in their fertilized egg stage. The adjustments, he said, his eyes narrowing further into a pair of slits. The first 9 Sekirei to be released were given more power than the others, likely due to this whole process of adjusting Sekirei being completely new to those who did the adjusting. They didn't know what to do, so those 9 were given more power, and a few were even given the title of scrap number because those who did the adjusting didn't necessarily know what they were doing and ended up making a mistake in the adjustment phase. Yes, that's it exactly, Naruto-tan. Matsu practically crowed in excitement. She seemed to really enjoy the fact that Naruto was so capable of putting things into perspective even when he didn't have all the necessary information. The single digits are all far more powerful than those who were adjusted later on. Each Sekirei from numbers 1 through 9 are supposedly so powerful that they are capable of taking on any one of the higher numbers even when they don't have an Ashikabi and the other Sekirei does. Except for you, right? Naruto said. Because you're not a fighting type but a brain type. Yep. Matsu replied cheerfully, not at all bothered about admitting she couldn't fight. Now, those single numbers have specs that are a bit naughtier than the ones that the others have, she said, readjusting her glasses as she looked up at the ceiling. Ah, Naruto and Matsu paused in their conversation in order to turn to Akatsu. The snow woman looked down at herself, and they both got the impression she was staring at her chest. I'm naughty, she said, her voice sounding embarrassed and a light blush on her pale cheeks. Naruto shook his head and reached over to pat Akatsu on the leg. She looked up at the blonde to see him smiling at her, then promptly looked away with another blush. Interlude over, Naruto turned to look at Matsu and renew their conversation. Okay, so the first 9 Sekirei have more power than the Sekirei that were found as fertilized eggs, Naruto started. The adjustment process was probably refined as time went on and adjustments not only became easier, but with the 99 in an egg state, they not only had more time to adjust their bodies but were likely able to make more adjustments due to the Sekirei in an egg state being more malleable and able to take to the adjustments easier. You're right on the money, Naruto-tan, Matsu told him with a smile. And you were one of the first, weren't you? Naruto asked, but continued before she could answer him. Sekirei number 02, Matsu, which would make you the second Sekirei to wake up. Correct again, Matsu said, and Naruto nodded as he let this new information give him the answer to another question he had but would not ask. If there were 108 Sekirei, and 8 of them were embryos and 99 were eggs, then the adult must be Mia, there was no other explanation for that woman's power. If there was another Sekirei who had even half of the power his landlady did, they would be easily capable of defeating most of the Kage from his time on pure power alone. It a scary thought, the first 9 Sekirei were the most powerful, yet Musubi, whose number was 88 had enough raw chakra, or whatever power Sekirei had, to match up with the Sandame Raikage. She may not have the techniques, and she may not have the experience, but in terms of raw power she was a match for the most powerful Raikage to ever live. If Musubi, a lower number Sekirei, could match the power of such a fearsome shinobi, then how powerful were the single numbers? I remember you and Mia-chan mentioning that her husband was the lead geneticist in charge of the Sekirei plan, Naruto stated, letting his curiosity guide him away from the real subject for a moment. Can I take that to mean he was the one who did most of the adjusting on the single numbers? Yep, he was the one who adjusted me and many of the first 9, Matsu answered him. In fact, Osamu Takehito was known as the other genius within MBI. He was another unique adult life form, but he wasn't a Sekirei. Well, strictly speaking at least. Strictly speaking. Naruto asked with a furrowed brow. So then what was he? Matsu blinked. It was only as Naruto asked his question that she seemed to realize what she had said. Gia. Oh crap. Nothing. I didn't say anything. Matsu shouted defensively as she began waving her arms in front of her face. There was absolutely nothing strange or unique about Takehito. Nope. Not at all. Naruto frowned. There was obviously something about Mia's husband that Mia herself didn't want others to know. The fact that Matsu was so afraid to tell him meant that either she had been sworn to secrecy and just respected Mia that much that she wouldn't tell him, or Mia was spying on them even now. And she teased Matsu for peeping. Thinking on the matter of Takehito, Naruto supposed it was possible that he was a human who had made several adjustments to himself in order to give himself a more Sekirei-like quality. Matsu had told him there were only 108 Sekirei in the spaceship, and only one of them was an adult. She had called Takehito a unique adult life form, and if Naruto's theory of Mia being number 01 were correct, then that meant Takehito could not be a Sekirei. After a little more thought, he decided to leave the matter of Takehito unresolved for now. While it was interesting, it wasn't something he needed to know at the moment. Okay, so I think I understand enough about Sekirei in general for the moment, Naruto interrupted Matsu's blabbering. So why don't you give me a review of the history of the Sekirei plan before MBI truly got started? His blue eyes narrowed as he thought about the first thing he wanted to know. You can start by telling me about the army that was wiped out. At his words, Matsu was quick to calm down. Her face became more serious as she looked at him. That's a difficult subject, she admitted, before continuing. After the founding of MBI, Hiroto Manaka managed to turn Kamakura Island into his own private land, removing it from the maps and turning it into an extraterritoriality. However, even with it removed from the maps, news of its existence reached the ears from outside. And so an invasion force was sent, Naruto said, nodding his head. That made sense, not only explaining why the force had been sent in the first place, but also why Naruto had never been able to gain anything more than rumors. The entire incident had been placed in a level of secrecy that went above anything that had ever happened in a government before or since. Even the black books containing all of the United States' most powerful secrets and shameful skeletons would be considered a minor threat when compared to this. Naruto was sure he could have found out more about the entire situation, of course, he had the resources. But at the time he had been far more interested in keeping his existence a secret, and thus determined that the risk of discovery involved had been too great and decided to ignore the incident like he had done everything else. Yes, when news of Kamakura Island's existence reached the outside world, a large force of unknown affiliation was sent to launch an invasion of the island. And at the time MBI didn't have an army, did they? Said Naruto with an expression of dawning comprehension. Is that part of the reason the first 9 were so powerful? Because MBI needed them in order to fend off the invasion force. That would make a lot of sense actually. At the time of the invasion, MBI had been a new and upcoming company, not yet large enough to have formed the private army it had today. If that were the case, then MBI would need a powerful force in order to fend off invasion attempts. By that logic, making sure that the Sekirei were as powerful as possible made a lot of sense. Yes and no, Matsu answered, bringing Naruto's attention back to her. At the time, only the first 5 had been awakened, and as a result of the invasion a special group was formed. The protectors of the S-Plan, the Discipline Squad. The S-Plan, said Naruto, blinking. Matsu closed her eyes and gave him a nod. That was the original name for the Sekirei plan. At first, the S-Plan was merely created in order to protect Kamakura Island from being invaded and keep the Sekirei still in their embryonic and egg states safe. It was nothing like the Sekirei plan that Manaka has now created. From the way Matsu's lips had thinned, it was clear she did not approve of what would happen later when the Sekirei plan was formed, which honestly told him a lot more than she probably realized. Matsu was the second Sekirei to awaken, meaning she had been on the Discipline Squad and worked directly for MBI during the invasion and was instrumental in repelling the invading forces. She had probably worked with MBI for some time after that, but later, when the S-Plan became Manaka's Sekirei plan she left, most likely sabotaging MBI in some way before her escape. And then she came to Mia, Sekirei number 01, and the one being that she knew MBI would be too wary of to attack. This story just kept getting more and more interesting. As you obviously already know, there were several invasion attempts on the island, Matsu said again, having regained her composure. But it was the first one that had been the largest scale in terms of both troops and firepower. The disciplined squad was formed to thwart this attack, and to defend the island at all costs. And they did, obviously. Naruto continued where Matsu left off. After all, the invasion force's failure was the reason those countries tried so hard to cover up their blunder. He snorted. Of course, they couldn't cover up something like that completely. The amount of lives lost in those 3 attempts had been catastrophic for the armies that force belonged to, and nearly several thousand families had been notified of their deaths. The military had claimed it was a large-scale training accident that involved an explosion at the facility where it happened due to a gas leak. Only problem was they made the mistake of claiming it only happened at one facility. The army that had been sent was unaffiliated because it had been sent by more than one military that had combined in an effort to claim the treasures at Kamakura Island without fighting amongst themselves. It was a rather rookie mistake, but then, the blonde chuckled. Most of the military bigwigs are a bunch of idiots. As Naruto finished talking, he realized that Matsu was gaping at him, one finger pointed in his direction as she did her best impression of a fish. What? He asked, feeling a little unnerved by the way she was gawking at him. How did you know that? She asked in a strangled voice. Even I didn't know that much, and I specialize in gathering intelligence. Naruto sighed as he realized that he had once again given too much information. Sure, Matsu may be his Sekirei, but it probably wasn't a good idea to let her know just how deep his worldwide intelligence network had ingratiated itself into the various governments of the world. He really needed to learn not to monologue his inner thoughts so much since he wasn't alone anymore. I told you before, didn't I? Said Naruto, his statement almost sounding like a question. Information is power. You don't think I just wandered around the world willy-nilly, did you? In order to travel as much as I have without people bothering me, I need intelligence, I need information, I need money, resources, and the ability to put all of it to use in such a way that I can come and go from any country I want as I please without people even batting an eyelash. But you're only 18. Matsu shrieked, causing Naruto to shrug. Let's just say it pays to be me and leave it at that, Matsu looked unsure about whether or not she should drop the subject like he asked, but Naruto was already moving on by this point. Now then, tell me about the Sekirei plan. Matsu worried her lower lip for a moment. Obviously she was concerned by the amount of information he had on the invasion of Kamakura Island. It was understandable, and perhaps Naruto shouldn't have spoken out loud. Then again, if he was truly going to go through with letting these Sekirei stay with him, they would need to know just what they were getting into. After all, Matsu and the others may be extraterrestrials from another planet, but Naruto was far from an ordinary human. After a few seconds of silence, Matsu closed her eyes and drew in a deep breath, then took off her glasses. She looked older and much more mature than she had with her glasses on. When she opened them, her gaze was nothing like the mischievous and childish eyes she had so far possessed. They were the eyes of someone who had seen death, who had caused death, who had experienced war, and knew the way the world truly worked. In short, they were the kind of eyes Naruto would expect from a former member of the disciplined squad. What would you like to know? Asked Matsu, her voice clipped as if she were speaking to a higher-ranking officer. Naruto smiled as he finally got to the crux of what he wanted to learn. Everything. Tell me everything there is to know about the Sekirei plan.